So, we were kind of talking about communication last time. Some things to keep lines of communication open. And we had just started into talking about communicating with older patients, which is a pretty large portion of the patients you're going to be seeing. Kind of one of those things, old people are everywhere, and they tend to call ambulances. So, when you are speaking with those older folks, you have to kind of feed off what they give you back. Okay, so if you're talking about that supraventricular tachycardia with aberrancy, and you're getting that deer in the headlights look, chances are that they're not understanding you, right? Same as it is with any person, but it's a little bit more prone to happen with the elderly folks. You also kind of have to watch for, are they able to hear you? If they're constantly turning their head one way, or they just simply don't react to sounds at all, you have to start thinking, okay, are they actually hearing this? Hearing loss is pretty prevalent. Now that being said, that we talked about last time, don't assume that they're deaf, because they really get annoyed when you talk at them like this. But keep that in mind. Okay? So, by far the biggest thing that we want to keep in the back of our minds and the back burner is be patient. Okay? Not everyone processes information at the same rate that we do, and this goes for all patients, not necessarily just the elderly. As people age, their ability to process new information does tend to slow down. That's across the board, okay? But that doesn't necessarily mean every single patient. So you may have some people that are 105 and they are sharp as a tack. Trust me, you'll spot them pretty quick. So they often don't feel or report as much pain. So again, you have to kind of watch facial expressions, watch for reactions to things to see are they actually in pain. A lot of times they don't want to report pain simply for the sake of they don't want to go to the nursing home. A lot of them are terrified of going to the nursing home. So you have to be just especially vigilant for all of those types of changes that you can actually see, hear, observe. Okay, use those to guide you. If at all possible, try to have them pack a little goodie bag. Most of the time, you're going to have time to do this. Okay, now if your person they're time sensitive, they're critical, they really got to go. Okay, somebody can come back and get their toothbrush. But if you think they're going to be at the hospital for a while, they want to bring their, glasses, hearing aid, whatever, take a few moments and get those. You think about it from the folks in the ER standpoint. If this person has their hearing aids or glasses, how much easier is it going to be for them to do their job? A whole lot easier because they're not having to say things 4 or 5 times. They also get very worried about that. I mean, if you think about it, anybody here ever had somebody that's worn hearing aids or something like that? How expensive were they? How expensive are they? Really? Yeah, you want to know where they are all the time, right? So do your patients. So we're going to go to, any questions on older folks? I know we kind of covered splits, but makes sense? So we're going to go to the other end of the spectrum now, okay? Deal with little ones. We have a whole chapter on little ones later on, but this is just specific to talking. So if you think back to when you were 4, some of you that wasn't very long ago, I'm talking to the group right here. It was like last week, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay. So if someone new showed up at your door and they showed up with lights and sirens and radios going off and all that, where was your anxiety level? Way up there, right? Who are these people? Why are they coming in here? I don't get this. So children may be very frightened by the actual response. If you go back to calm and chaos are contagious, if you present a calm demeanor, very frequently that child's going to calm down as well. Okay? So just keep that in mind as you're coming in, that you may actually be kind of amping this poor little one up. If at all possible, give them some sense of normalcy, whether that be a favorite toy, a blanket, being near their parents or a family member. Again, make something be normal for them. If it's practical, Let the parent or guardian or a sibling or something hold the child during your evaluation and treatment while you're on scene. Once you get moving, that rule changes. For the longest time, we would put, we put little ones in mom's arms and then we drive to the hospital. You do the math, because I'm kind of a nerd, and I at one point have done the math on this, but I shouldn't say I cheated and had a website do the math. But an 8-pound child at 55 miles an hour with a sudden deceleration, it takes almost a half ton of force to hold that kid in. Is anyone here capable of generating 1,000 pounds of force? No, I'm not. Okay. So it's quite simply, mom is not going to be able to hold this kid in the event of a crash. So we want to make sure that we actually have the child secure. When you're talking to little ones, be honest. Little kids are like a great lie detector. Okay? Every once in a while you can fool them, but if you do it enough, they're going to very quickly catch on that you're untrustworthy. So if it's going to hurt, tell them it's going to hurt. You can downplay it some. Well, it's going to hurt. It's like a little bee sting or something. Expect them to still be anxious about it, but you can at least kind of use that to your advantage. Don't ever tell them, nope, it's not going to hurt, and then have it hurt. Okay, because they're not going to trust you from that point on. Respect your child's modesty, especially when you start getting into older children. You have a 14-year-old girl and you have to do something that exposes her chest. That's pretty damaging to their psyche, right? The idea of being exposed in front of everybody. Do we necessarily have to do this skill right here? Can we build a little wall with sheets? Something like that to protect the child's modesty. So you want to be professional and friendly, nice, calm tone, good pace of words, not too fast. Maintain eye contact as long as the little one's accepting of that. Okay, some kids, you really engage them, they kind of take that as imposing and back off. You want to read their face. Try to position yourself at the child's level. That's a rule though that can kind of be bent. Sometimes if you want the kid to really do what you want, they say, hey, I need this done. More of an authoritative pose may actually help you there. Okay, so again, feed off what your patient's giving you back. Any questions on that? All right, so we'll move on to patients who are hearing impaired. Just because they're deaf does not mean they're stupid. Okay? Most of them are normal or very high intelligence. And most are not embarrassed by the fact that they have a disability, and that they're not able to hear as well. They've learned to just deal with this. Okay, it's part of their normal life. Try a position so the patient can see your face. So if they can read lips, that's an option. Don't assume that they can read lips. They do have a hearing aid. One, be careful they're not lost. If at all possible, try to locate them. If your patient is confused or otherwise not of normal mentation, they may forget their hearing aids. So then you may have to kind of make sure that, hey, do you have this or this? Use family there as far as, hey, do they have any hearing aids? They'll probably tell you. Make sure that they get transported. So I had a thought there and it left me, so we'll just move on. So if you have someone who is just absolutely, you're not having any luck conversing with them because of a hearing issue, have a pen and paper available. Most of your patients, just simply from an age standpoint, are going to be able to read and write, so they may be able to just simply do things written back and forth. Is it time consuming? Absolutely. Is it better than just guessing? Absolutely. Even on people that are a little bit younger, you may be able to use pictures and things like that to be able to get ideas back and forth. The key thing is, don't shout unless you know that that's necessary. Okay, if you have family that are saying, no, you have to scream at him, okay, well then you have an idea that maybe that's the case. But don't default to shouting at your patients. So if you are so inclined and want to learn some sign language, there are a lot of classes out there. Have you guys ever had to sign to a patient? I never have. Yeah. Usually those other options you're able to get around the idea of having to sign. I have had patients who were able to sign, but it was never a need to thing. They could also read, or most of them, even if they're deaf, some of them could still speak. Try to listen very carefully. Some of their speech may not be as clear as you would expect. And use a lot of, this is where you get more of those closed-ended questions until you've got an idea of what's going on. Things that are yes and no, that are a little easier to answer. So any questions on hearing impaired? All right, go on to visually impaired. Ask if they can see anything. Can they see shapes, colors, blurry images, things like that? Ask if their vision is different than it normally is. Because just because they're visually impaired doesn't necessarily mean that they're completely blind. Even if they say they're legally blind, they can still have some vision. Again, expect them to have normal intelligence. Just because they're blind doesn't mean they're dumb. The key to it is explain everything you're doing as or before, even better, you're doing it. Okay. So I'm going to grab your arm, you're going to take your blood pressure, things like that. Because they may not be able to recognize that you're doing these things. If you have someone who is completely blind, you're pretty much going to have to dedicate one person to them. Doesn't necessarily have to be a trained person, but just someone to keep them where they are. Okay? We don't want them wandering into traffic or anything like that. So we can stay in physical contact. If you do walk them somewhere, be sure to be a guide for them and watch in front of them. Don't walk them into a hole. We've all seen the cartoon about the seeing eye dog that walks into the back of a jet plane or something. Be sure that you're actually completely watching out for them. If they have any aids like a cane or glasses or something like that, by all means take those with you. So speaking of seeing eye dogs, they're guide dogs. We like to think of them as only dogs. Service animals comes in all different shapes and sizes. Everything from birds to llamas have been used as service animals. So they do need to be identified by the Americans with Disability Act. A vast majority of the time that happens. They'll have a harness or a tag on or something. But not always. So try to determine whether or not this is just somebody's pet or if it's actually their service animal. If possible, transport the dog with the patient. That sometimes is possible, sometimes isn't. I mean, I know I've had times where I've done that. Lauren, have you ever transported a service animal? I'll say, yeah, it's about a 50-50 split between who had it. Oh, okay. So was it like an emotional support? I'm picturing this magician's act with a dove flying out. Awesome. So, so that does alleviate a lot of stress for both the animal and the person. If you think about it, most of these people will have their service animal for about 75 to 80% of the animal's life. So if you figure for a dog, their service is usually somewhere around 10 years. So this person may have been with this animal every waking moment for the last 10 years. They're going to want to know where that dog is. Okay. If you're not able to care for the dog immediately, arrange for care of the dog. By far your best resource there is your police officer. Okay. Because they have systems in place to be able to get that dog taken care of. Usually, either the officer does it themselves or they bring in people from the Humane Society or ASPCA, something like that. So non-English speaking patients. You wouldn't think that in tiny little LaGrange up in the middle of nowhere, Indiana, that we have people that don't speak our language. We do. Everywhere you have an interstate, you have a pipeline for people that are from all over the place. Okay? So you're going to run into this. So you're going to have to find some way to get information from them. So try to find out, if you're walking up to a scene and you're hearing a language that you don't recognize, first off, try to find out, does the person know English as a second language? A lot of them do. If they don't, again, try to use those closed-end questions. Even if they do know English, they may not know it very well. Closed-ended questions, yes, no, this, that kind of things. Be sure to point or touch parts of the body. work off your patient. If you start pointing at things and they start freaking out, you maybe need to back off a little bit. They don't understand what's going on. If at all possible, have someone interpret for you. Very frequently, if you have a family of 5, take a guess who's going to be the interpreter of the group.
Yeah.
What's that? The kid, right? Because they're the ones going to school and having to learn English as a second language, right? Can we use a little kid to interpret?
Yeah.
Absolutely, as long as you speak at the kid's level. You have to remember that even though you're assessing an adult, you may need to assess them as if they're a 5-year-old because you're assessing them through a 5-year-old. Okay, so make sure that the information is actually getting through the way it should. If you're so inclined and want to learn common phrases of languages that are used in your area, we have an interstate that comes through, so there's no telling what language. There's not really a prevalent second language. Some areas, I'll use Ligonier as an example, very, very high Spanish-speaking language. Here, there may be a little bit of Dutch or German. Is it a mix? It's Dutch? Okay. Okay. That's just the thing. You have to worry about dialects. Even sign language, there's like 15 or 16 different dialects within sign language. Okay, so even you're not even speaking, and you still have dialects. So don't always assume that, well, the book says this, that kind of thing. Some ambulances carry pocket cards, which are kind of helpful, but they're limited to 1 or 2 languages at a time. One tool that I use a lot is Google Translate. Because the good part is, it even pronounces it for you. Does anybody have Google Translate on their phone? It's a free app, it's awesome. Yeah. Nothing else, you can learn how to say dirty things in another language. So it's entertainment as well. Please, 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 if you have someone where you're having to translate, let the hospital know that they need a translator. Sometimes the hospital will have somebody on staff that happens to speak that same language. If not, they all have access to a phone service where they can dial, and you just simply tell them what language you need. They even have a service technically that you can say, well, I don't even know what language this is, and they start talking to the person, and they listen and say, okay, well, I think this is Swahili. And then they dial a number and somebody that speaks Swahili pops up. I mean, it's really a neat service. It takes some time, so you have to let them know that it's coming. So far we've only been talking to our patients. Well, that's only about a third of the portion here. We also have to talk to other providers. So when we get to the hospital, and even before then, we have to give a report to the hospital staff, let them know what's coming up. And make sure that that's a person at least your level of training. And when we get into medical legal, we'll talk about abandonment. But we want to make sure that that person is at least as trained as we are. So we don't want to bring in someone who's, post-cardiac arrest and we drop them off to the housekeeper. They're great people, but they're not going to know what you're talking about. Which is not always that easy. Luckily, Parkview, somewhere along the line, somebody thought, hey, let's color code these people. So if you know the color code, you kind of know who you're talking to. I'll be honest with you, I've worked here for quite a while. I only know a handful of the colors. I know Caribbean Blues and Nurse. That's what I go towards. I know Arteezer and Brown. Yeah. You start getting the surgical nurses and all that. Yeah, then all bets are off. So keep that in mind wherever you happen to be working. It's okay to ask. Okay, are you an RN or are you the tech? That's okay to ask. Same thing with nursing homes. Just simply ask who they are. So some components of an oral report. Okay, we're trying to hand off care now. First and foremost, give them their name, and I'm going to add in date of birth there. They need 2 patient identifiers to look into their system to see if they're in the database. If they are in the database, it solves a lot of your problems because all that information is already there. So name, date of birth, or at least age. A chief complaint, okay, just tell them, hey, what's going on here, all right? So you're going to give them a quick rundown, and then detailed information is things that you didn't put into your radio report. So things, this is what we've done, all this, and we'll talk about radio reports here in a bit. And then important history, things that you didn't cover in that other report. make sure that who you are speaking to at the ER in person actually had anything to do with your radio report. Most of the time they don't. So how it works is there's this radio in the middle of the nurse's station. It goes off, and whoever happens to be walking by says, "Go ahead, medic 2," and then goes off and does whatever they do. You know, it may not necessarily be the nurse that's taking care of the patient that you're bringing in. Okay, so you can just simply ask, "Hey, did you get to your report?" So that they kind of know, so you kind of know whether or not they actually have any clue as to what you're bringing in. So you want to kind of talk about what you did and the response to that. Did they get better? Did they get worse? A set of vital signs, or better yet, a trend of vital signs. And then any other information that feels pertinent. So we're going to back up a little bit and kind of talk radio reports. So some components of a radio report. I'll be honest with you guys, radio reports are kind of like underwear. Everybody's like, okay, where's he going with this? Everybody has their own favorite set, right? So if you ask 15 people what comprises the perfect radio report, you're going to get 15 different answers. For me, and this has worked well in my career, is who you are and how far away you are. Because those are probably the two biggest things that the person on the other end of the radio wants to know. What they're trying to decide on the other end of the radio is what room do they go into and who do I need to call? Is this something where I can just come in as a nurse and handle, or do I need an RT? Do I need to get a hold of CT, or do I need a doctor in the room? They're trying to figure out what resources do I need. Okay, so to do that, they need to know how far away you are. So who you are and how far away you are. Then kind of give a synopsis of this is what the main problem is. Okay, so we're EMS 2, we're 10 minutes away with a patient with difficulty breathing. Then you can kind of go into the specifics of how did what did you see when you got there? What did you observe? Okay, so patient was found on the floor in severe distress with accessory muscle use, and I know I'm talking kind of ahead of you guys, but you kind of see where this is what we were looking at. Then it's what did you do about it? So we went ahead and put her on oxygen, and she didn't have an inhaler, so we haven't done that. So then it's what did we do about it? Then it's how did they respond? Okay, she's now feeling better, but work and breathing is still slightly increased. Then a set of vitals, and then give your ETA again, because they may not have caught it at the beginning. Make sense? So, we're out of the oral stuff. Now we're going to start writing things down. So, the chart, as a lot of people refer to it, is technically called a patient care report, or a pre-hospital care record, or your care report. It depends on who you're asking. But basically, it's a PCR. Okay? That is a legal document. When we talk about medical legal, we'll go a little bit more into that. But what it means is it can be subpoenaed, and it can be used as evidence. Okay? It is the legal record of what happened. So we want to make sure that it's accurate and complete. Because that is our, we talked about the last time, how long is it going to be until a lawsuit actually takes place? It's a couple of years out, right? You're probably not going to remember it. So this is your record. They can become in two different forms. It's either written or electronic. Most services that actually are doing transports have switched over to electronics. Not all of them. Both of them have pluses and minuses. So the main functions, one is continuity of care. There are some services, that require you to do your chart before you leave the hospital. The reason being is they want to have that written record so they can go forward from care from there. Not all services require that. Again, it is a legal document, so that's the legal documentation of that incident. It can be used for education. So they look at this chart and say, okay, hey, can we learn something from this? Administrative stuff. Things like how many runs did we go on, how many runs were cardiac related, how many, so they can kind of start tracking statistics, billing things like that. They can do research from that, not only at a local level, but also all the way to a worldwide level. And then CQI, you want to say, did we do this right? Could we have done it better? Some information you'll put into a PCR, things like chief complaint, their level of consciousness, vital signs, demographics, who they are, and then all of the different portions of things that that we have to figure out in order to be able to care for them. So some times you have to have when the incident was reported. Sometimes that's recorded at dispatch, sometimes it's recorded for you guys. When you were notified, a lot of services want to know when you were en route, when you arrived at the scene, when you accessed your patient, when you left the scene, times of any interventions as you did them, and then when you arrived at the receiving facility, when you handed off care, and when you got back in service. So basically, if it happens, they're going to kind of want to know what time it happened at, so that they have this. So traditional written form, a lot of times they're going to use check boxes and an open section to be able to just write narrative. We'll talk about narrative in a bit. The computerized versions sometimes do it a little bit differently. So probably the hardest part of teaching someone to do charting is teaching them to write a good narrative. And there's a few different ways to do it. We'll kind of go through a few. So some things that have to be in there is the time. I kind of like to use the word sequence of events. Okay, so what happened when, your assessment findings, what care you provide, so what you saw, what you did, how the patient responded to that, any observations at the scene that you saw that were like, oh, okay, well, this seems a little funky, it seems pertinent. What you did with your patient, whether it be you transported them, they refused, they were dead, whatever. If they refused, which we'll talk about the next chapter about they do have the right to say I don't want treatment. And then the person who continued care, who did you give them to? Any negative findings, things that you were expecting to be there but that weren't. Those are also important. We don't want to make judgments, so we don't want to think, I want to document, I think this person's drunk. Do we have any way to prove that? Not unless we have a lab in the back of the truck. None of our trucks have labs. So be very careful about what we call subjective information. So the difference between subjective and objective. Objective, I kind of like to think it's like an object. You can see it, hear it, taste it, touch it, right? It's right there in front of you. You can prove it one way or the other. Subjective is just the opposite of that. It's opinions and conjecture. Okay? So to put it in an example, we use the example of someone who we think is drunk. If I said I think Paul is drunk, is that subjective or objective? Subjective, right? Because I can't prove he's drunk. Now, if I said he had an odor about him, can I sense that? Yeah, that becomes an objective. Avoid radio codes or jargon, things like that, and use only standard abbreviations. That's what the book tells you to do. I want to go one step further. Just don't use them. The one I always love is drops. The abbreviation for drops has the same number of letters as the word drops. It's a waste of it. Just write it out. Especially your electronic, it'll start suggesting words for you anyway a lot of the time. Things can be misunderstood. One of the common abbreviations for shortness of breath is SOB. So if I wrote, I ran on an SOB in a trailer park, that means a whole other thing, right? So they can be misconstrued. Remember that this report is a confidential document. So even though the run is really cool, you can't go waving it around and saying, look what I did, look what I did. It's protected. So every once in a while, we're going to be writing a chart, and we're going to screw something up. It's just going to happen. So there's a very specific way to repair errors, to fix them. Okay. First and foremost, don't cover it up. You make a mistake, there's a way to fix it. People understand that people make mistakes. Okay. I've had times where I was working on somebody diligently on someone's, injuries on their left side when that's their right, you big dummy. Because they were kind of wondering why the ER record and my record didn't match. Why were they on different sides of the body? So I went back and I fixed it. So what we want to avoid is falsification. That's when we're putting things in there that we either know are false or that we can't verify are true. What happens, that results in a lot of, anybody ever heard garbage in, garbage out? You put bad information into a system, you're going to get bad results out. These things have a lot of functions. They screw the system up and we put things in there that aren't supposed to be there. So, on a written chart, if you discover an error, this is going to be a test question, so you're going to take care of that one. All right, if you discover an error while you're writing your report, you draw a single line through it so that you can still read what it says. Because if you scribbled it all out, what's it look like you're doing? You covered something up, right? That looks like the CIA just came through. And you guys ever seen any documents from like high-level government stuff? Oh my God, it's like the chicken, bird, gun. That's all they, out of 15 pages, that's the only 3 words you can actually see. So single line through it, initial it just above so they know who made the change, and then write the correct information next to it. So if, in my example where I was working on the right side, I should have been working on the left, I would just cross out right, initial it, and then sometimes you can use a little arrow up to it to see, okay, this is where I'm writing it, and put in left. Okay? Don't try to completely erase it or cover it with whiteout or anything like that. Again, it looks like you're hiding something. On an electronic record, you would be tempted to just go in and change it, right? It's digital, we can just change it. The problem is, how do we know if things have been changed? So like, let's say Mike wrote a chart, and he wrote, I think this patient was experiencing cardiac pain. And I come through and be like, oh man, I'm working with him. It's like, well, if he was having cardiac pain, I should have been with the patient, not him. I don't want to do that. Is there anything that says I can't go in and change something that he wrote? Unless the system logs that, there's no way to tell that. So instead of changing things, you actually go in and do what's called an addendum. All right? So what you're doing is you're coming in and saying, okay, I've got something to add to this. And the addendum in that case would be simply, patient condition was charted erroneously or something like that. It should have read this. Okay, so you never take things away from a chart once you submit it. You only add to it. That make sense? So, refusals. And like we'll talk about in the next chapter, they do have the right to tell you to go get bent. Hey, I don't want you. Unfortunately, that puts us in kind of a bad spot because it is by far one of the biggest causes of lawsuits. Because people say, I don't want you, we leave, and then they say, well, maybe I'm a little sicker than I think, and now it's, well, why didn't you take care of me? You were here. So you have to make sure that you realize that you tried to take care of them. So by far the chart that you should put the most effort into is any time that you don't treat a patient. Okay? Because you want to rule out all of those little things that can make you look guilty if things get twisted. Okay? So very thorough, accurate, complete documentation is just absolutely important. So document all your findings, anything that you see here, saw there, go all out with it. Okay? Have them sign what's called a refusal of care form, and every service is going to have their own. If you're a service that accepts refusals, a lot of times the fire departments and stuff, they go, hey, stick around, and then we actually come in and do the refusal. It's kind of nice for you guys because you don't have to worry about the liability then. Every once in a while, though, you're going to have somebody that just gets up and leaves before we get there. So you're still going to have to document that somehow, whatever your department does to document that, but it needs to be documented. If the patient won't sign, you can have a family member or a bystander or somebody. By far, the best witness in anything is police officer. Court of law, their word is almost gold. Okay, short of video, that's probably the next best thing, is the signed statement from a police officer. So if you have one of those, use one of those. And we'll cover refusals more when we get into medical legal. So some special reporting things, these are times where you have to tell somebody about stuff. Because as a society, we want to know these things are out there and that they're getting taken care of. So things like gunshot wounds, probably should report that to somebody, right? Okay, mainly being law enforcement. Dog bites. Okay, if we have a dog that's biting somebody, do we know where it's the first time that dog's bitten somebody? Not unless we track it. Okay, so we may need to use this information to track the dog or contain it, possibly even euthanize the dog. Infectious diseases. If no one said anything about infectious diseases, how quickly would they spread? They just go like wildfire because we wouldn't know that we need to come in and take steps to control a pandemic. Any type of neglect or abuse, if abuse is anywhere in your phrase of thinking, it's a mandatory report. Whether that be a kid, an old person, a special needs person, domestic abuse, any sort of abuse, it's a mandatory report. Okay? Any multiple casualty incidents or anything big, okay, you're going to want to make sure that somebody knows about that, usually that's your administrator. Any commission of crimes, again, that goes to law enforcement. Back to the physical and sexual abuse, or any type of abuse, I should say. Can we prove abuse? No. Okay, so I've had a little one that was so bruised I couldn't tell what race this little kid was. This entire kid's body was one gigantic bruise in different stages of healing. Did I know that kid was being abused? Absolutely. Could I prove it? No. So, when you do a report, you are reporting suspected abuse. There are millions of cases every year where someone reports, okay, I think little Joey's uncle is sexually abusing him. And it turns out to be false. I'll pick on Jay here. How about if I put it in the newspaper tomorrow that I think that you're abusing little kids sexually? How is that going to work out for the rest of your life? Yeah. You're going to be a pariah pretty much wherever you go. Right? Are you going to be able to work in this business anymore? Do you want somebody that you think may be a sexual predator going in? No. It can ruin careers. Okay? It can ruin lives. So again, we report suspicions. Who do we? I'm sorry. What?
When you write like, okay, I suspect this. You always because I find you always got because you find this or you see this.
You're going to be documenting what you see, hear, smell. That.
Right.
Okay. Child told me his uncle did this, caused this bruise by hitting him with a bat. Did that child say that to you? Right? As opposed to child's uncle did this with a bat. So all you're reporting is what you actually heard, saw, or whatever. You're not drawing any conclusions from it. Does that make sense? We're not investigators. That's not our job. We just simply have to report them to the people that do those investigations. So abuse cases, who do we report them to? If there's law enforcement there and you can get somewhere where it's appropriately confidential, say, hey, I think this kid may be getting beat up. That's one way to do it. A lot of times when you get to the hospital, you report it to whoever's taking care. Now, the hospital has a pretty formal system to be able to get these things reported to different organizations, whether it be law enforcement or there's some other governmental people that come in and do the investigations for these, like, child services or adult pregnancy services, those kind of things. They have the resources to get that out there. You just simply have to pass it on to someone that you know will take it and do something with it. Make sense? Perfect. So, how do we communicate? We talked about, the words that we're doing and all that. So, what about the equipment? So, probably the biggest tool that you're going to use is the radio and the telephone. And it allows us to speak over distances. Used to be radio was by far the most common one. To be honest with you, a lot of times the cell phones start to creep into the, be about equal with that. Some places it even has moved past it. So we kind of have to know those equipment systems, at least on a working knowledge basis. So we'll kind of go through the pieces and parts. A base station. That is a high-powered transmitter and receiver in a fixed location. It doesn't move. Okay? So it's stationed at a base. Kind of an easy way to remember. Now there are more than one type of radio. Okay? The one we are really kind of referring to is what's called a two-way radio, which means it can send and receive. Up until the mid-60s, radio was all one way. So they would just put the call out, and then the responders would take care of it, never being able to talk back to their dispatcher. Luckily, we don't have that anymore. And that would make me like not have a warm and fuzzy, not being able to call for help or anything. So again, we use two-way radios. So it consists of a transmitter, which is something that puts messages out, and then a receiver, which brings them in. A mobile radio is basically a base station, but it's put into something that moves, usually the ambulance itself. And then it's not quite as high powered as what the base stations are, typically, but higher than what the next one we'll talk about, which is a portable radio, or something you can hold in your hand. Portable radios are kind of your lifeline, guys. I always teach new people never be within more than an arm's length of your radio. That includes when you're sitting in a station. Is there anything from stopping Freddy Krueger from running in that front door right now? Other than a thin pane of glass, no. Okay. Well, is it probable? No. But I want to know that I have at least the ability to call out for help if I need it. So here's where some people kind of get a little confused. That's the concept of a repeater. A repeater is a device that receives and sends, and it does it in order to be able to make the message go further. Okay, so let's say I have a message that I want to get to Daryl, sorry. I want to get a message to Daryl, but I have laryngitis. I can scream for all I'm worth and you're not going to hear me, right? What I can do is tell Sarah. She can scream loud enough to be able to hear him, right?
What's up?
See, now he then gets that message, right? I hope he lit up. So okay, so then he responds to it. Give me some sort of verbal response.
Oh, just hanging out at EMT class.
Just hanging out at EMT class.
See, the repeater in action. What it does is it simply takes a message on one frequency and retransmits it on another. It just simply repeats it. But it does so at a higher magnitude to where it can travel further distances. That allows two very low-powered radios to be able to speak to each other over a distance. Our radio system, for example, since it's digital, the state runs it, I can talk to units in Indianapolis or Evansville because it runs through a repeater system. Now, there's a little bit more complex, but you get the idea. So here it is in picture form. Okay, I want to talk to some dispatcher. I'm in the truck. I'm too far away. All I have to do is talk to the repeater that's in between us, and then it talks back and forth. Make sense? Okay. Back in the day, we used to use analog stuff. Most people don't even know what analog means anymore, because it's kind of dinosaur technology. So most of our equipment now is digital. Nice part with that is the signal is much clearer and able to be transmitted. The only problem is it becomes a yes or no kind of thing. Either you get a signal or you don't. So I'm sure those of you that have been around for a while, have you ever heard the systems go digital? Where you get that, it sounds like you're going into the matrix kind of thing. It recognizes there's a signal, but it can't do anything with it because it doesn't have enough strength. So it just makes this weird noise. So that's kind of one of the limitations of a digital system. It's either you get a message that's nice and clear, or you get this digital noise that's no good. One of the things that's kind of taking off is the idea of telemetry. Down the southern part of Allen County, I've got some students down that work down there. They're trying a system called Triage. It's a really dumb name, but you know, whatever. But what it allows you to do is send data from your area to the hospital. Things like cardiac rhythm, vital signs, video. So if you have a patient with a stroke and you want to be able to have the neurologist actually speak directly to the patient, if you have this equipment, you turn it on, you point it at the patient, and they're talking to each other. Okay? So again, that telemetry is all that electronic data being fed back and forth. We do have simple telemetry here. We can send 12 leads and things like that. But services that do full telemetry, again, it's all the way up to video and different types of chatting and all kinds of stuff. So anymore, radio's starting to phase out. Phones are starting to take its place, which cell phone by its inner workings is just basically a low-powered portable radio. They work the same way. Some services use satellite phones. It's more where it's real remote. If you work in like Wyoming or something. You go all the way back to the old school system, which is a public address system. So the PA on the truck, you get on there and you just kind of tell them whatever you want to tell them, but it's just heard locally. It's just a big loudspeaker. So some of the things that these systems have in common is they have different categories of how they work. And it's dependent on how many people can be talking at the same time. A simplex system, which is by far the easiest technologically, is I push to talk, I release to listen. Only one person talks at a time. So that makes it to where people have to take turns back and forth being able to talk, right? Because only one person can be transmitting at a time. It makes things very clunky and hard to get things back and forth. It's kind of like playing the game 20 questions where you only get to ask for the information that you want. Now duplex, it makes it where both people can talk and listen at the same time on the same frequency. That's more like an actual telephone. Okay? So I mean, you ever had a time where you're talking on a telephone and both of you talk at the same time? Both of you heard the other person talk at the same time because it can go both ways. But you're limited by how much you can put across there because you're on a single frequency. Right? You only have one line. Multiplex goes one step further, where it makes it where you can have more than one frequency. Think of that kind of like the conference call. So we can all be talking simultaneously to different people. Everybody follow me? So we're going to go one step further into this rabbit hole. Talk about trunking. Most common systems are trunked. And what we mean by that is that think of it like there's a trunk full of frequencies. There's 5 frequencies to choose from. And all of you guys are trying to get on at the same time. Right? You're all wanting to talk at the same time because we have a really big event. But we only have those 5 channels. We have more people wanting to talk than we have channels available to talk. So what it does is whoever either has a priority or is their earliest gives them a channel up to the channels are full. And that tells the other people, no, you have to wait until the channel comes open. Whether it be that first person's channel or the last person's channel. As soon as something comes open, you're then given that channel. Everybody follow that? That's another state test question. They love talking about trunking. The whole goal of all of this is to have what we call an interoperable communication system. When you guys go through your NIMS stuff, you're probably going to hear that a lot. Interoperability. What it means is everyone can talk to everyone. It's the holy grail of radios. Okay? We haven't accomplished this yet. Just that simple. To where everyone can talk to everyone. We've made big strides in it. It used to be we wouldn't be able to talk to the counties around us. We can only talk to ourselves. Sometimes we can talk to each other, but we can't talk to the fire department because they're on a different channel or a different bank or something like that. It used to be much worse than it is now. Granted, are you guys on a different channel? Absolutely. But at least I have access to that channel. I can turn to it if I want to. Doesn't seem like that big of a deal until you start thinking very big. You think Hurricane Katrina. There were literally thousands of different entities that were going to Hurricane Katrina. All of them bringing their own radio channels. So if you think of yourself as a commander to this, you're trying to organize this, how on earth do you get everybody to do what you want them to do if you have to use 1,000 different radio channels to do it, right? So that's where they really started making this push to be able to, everyone to be able to speak to everyone. Now what they have is a handful of channels that everyone has access to. So they just move that incident to this channel, and then it solves the problem. Kind of a newer thing in this is what we call a mobile data terminal, which is basically a computer that talks back and forth. We have one in our trucks, every one of our trucks. They're actually kind of nice when they work. They suck when they don't. But instead of having to call in and say we're en route, we're on scene, it's just a push of a button. They can send us notes for things they might not necessarily want to put out over the radio. Things like key locations, or, you know, hey, this patient's been arrested 7 times for methamphetamine production in the last month. The things that we need to know, but they may not necessarily want to put out over the air. Okay, it gives us that opportunity to do that. It also maps for us, which is huge. Most of us know our county pretty well, but again, you start thinking big. If I get sent, you know, I'm on duty and I get sent to a response in Ohio, I am not going to know their road system. I'm not going to have maps for it either. Now, granted, I'm lucky enough I have my phone if the cell system's up, if, you know, stuff like that. So it gives us the opportunity to be able to do mapping and things like that. So any electronic transmission that we involve is overseen by the FCC. So they're pretty much the boss over anything that gets transmitted. So they allocate which frequency we have, which radio system we run off of. To a point, we have we get some choices. What our call signs are, what we're allowed to call ourselves over the radio, how we get licensed, the actual equipment itself. It has to be so powerful it can't be any more powerful than this. They also monitor radio operations. Believe it or not, there actually is a computer farm where they listen for the words bomb and terrorist and all of this stuff to go over any sort of electronic thing. And then they can flag that and it gets investigated. Now that, for us, kind of a funny little story. When we first got the digital 800 system, I was over at DeKalb County, and there were 2 people that, hey, this is kind of cool. We hadn't really started using it yet, so they just wanted to see how well it worked. So they started talking about which strip club they wanted to go to. Both of their radios got what we call bricked. The state just said, okay, well, if you're going to use it for this, we're going to shut them down. So now this $4,000 radio doesn't know itself from a toaster. The FCC did that all remotely. Okay, so they watch all that stuff. So now we're going to kind of walk through the communication steps of the run itself. So responding is, you know, probably the first thing. We actually skipped a little bit of recognizing the incident, reporting it, but we'll come back to that. So the dispatcher has to get that call and realize, okay, is this a priority call? Who do I need to send? All right. So whether it be EMS units, law enforcement, fire, whatever. They then coordinate with other services. So things like, okay, Paul's with the fire department, I'm coming with an ambulance. He gets on scene and realizes there's wires down on the north side of the incident. He comes up and says, hey, tell all units to come in from the south. That dispatcher's charged with making sure that everybody gets that information. And then some of them provide instructions to the caller. Probably the one they get most often is like tie up your pets and make sure your door's unlocked, stuff like that. All the way up to doing CPR. They actually can talk people through giving some medications before you get there. So, yes?
These fire your ambulance, you just come to stop. I mean, the dispatch, do they dispatch NIPSCO or whoever, the RUC over?
That is local to each particular service. So there's not like a blanket answer. Here,
anybody calls, hey, you got wires down.
I would hope that the dispatcher would say, okay, this is pretty confirmed. We know we're going to need this resource if they send it. But I can't speak for them, you know what I mean?
They will go to Green.
Actually go to Ranch Park, Ranch Deal. So it can get convoluted as things bounce back and forth. It's not a perfect system. I'm not gonna lie to you. But that message will eventually make the circle. Sometimes it's easier since we do have the option of just going directly. Just come up and go direct. At the end of the day, the dispatcher is responsible to make sure that message gets there. Does that make sense? So as far as calling other units, it's kind of a dispatcher by dispatcher thing. You know what I'm saying? So, if you do have something that comes up that's out of the ordinary, or you need assistance or something, you can have that conversation back and forth with your dispatcher. And then you also tell them, okay, hey, we're on scene. So they know that they can kind of take a secondary role in that. So, when you guys do your clinicals, you're going to get a lot of chance to see this communication process back and forth. So we're not going to hit it in super detail. We're just going to kind of hit the high points, okay? So when we're talking to medical control or to the hospital itself, usually what we're asking for, we're either telling them, hey, this is what we're bringing you, or we're asking for guidance or an order. Okay, we want to get information back. So each one kind of has its own pros and, as far as ins and outs. Probably the other time that we want to tell them of something is, okay, hey, we've got something special, something weird, things like hazmat incidents or mass casualty. These hospitals need time to be able to gear up for that. Okay, so we need to let them know about that. So when you give a patient report, we know we kind of covered this a little bit. Your unit identification, who you are. Some services want you as far as what you can do, so what level of care you provide. Here locally, they're all paramedic level trucks, so it's not that big a deal. Your ETA, age and gender, that's good. I mean, you can sometimes just simply say I have a shortness of breath patient, and they'll worry about the rest later. Chief complaint, brief history of the problem, your physical findings, so what you saw occurred, that kind of thing. What care you gave, how they responded to it. And then I like to put that ETA again at the end, just to make sure that they heard it. So that way they can make that decision. Do I need to call people or whatever? So, offline or online medical control. You guys remember what that is? We talked about it. It's online medical control. What's that? Yes, you're actually speaking to someone, whether that be in person, over the radio, over the phone, whatever, but you're having a real-time conversation. And offline is everything else. Okay? We talk about standing orders and protocol. So there will come times where you don't have a standing order or a protocol for something. So you're going to have to call and ask, hey, can I do this, or what do you want me to do? There's a lot of times where getting your doc involved is very helpful. So you need to be good at painting a picture with words. Be able to do that. We'll talk more about that when we get a little later in. So medical control is almost exclusively provided by a physician. Every once in a while it's kind of done remotely through another provider, but ultimately it does end up at a physician in order to provide any orders. A few different ways to do that, again, whether it be radio, cell phone, whatever. There are some ports where they do what's called a centralized emergency dispatch, which is everything flows through the dispatcher. Those are becoming more and more rare because they tie the system up a lot, but there are some that still do that. Resource coordination centers, those would be things like Chemtrack or poison control, where it's not really necessarily your hospital, but it's an organization that is there to give you information. So, when you contact medical control, you have to remember that you're the eyes and ears and hands of that physician. Okay, you're extending that care out. So they can only base what they say to do over what you give them. If you give them bad information or incomplete information, they're going to have to make a decision based off that incomplete or inaccurate information. So be sure that you give them the whole story in a format that is at least somewhat decipherable. It's okay to ask questions back and forth. Make sure that you guys understand each other. If you do get an order, repeat it back word for word. Because you want to make sure that what you heard was actually what that physician wanted you to do. Methyltrexaline and methotrexaline sound very similar to each other, right? They're two completely different classes of drugs. You would never give one in a time where you would also give the other. Okay? So repeat it back. Some drug names, especially like when you're talking to poison control or Chemtrack or something, you'll actually spell it out to make sure that, okay, this is exactly what we're talking about. So what happens if you get an order that you think is not right? Or it doesn't make sense? And it's like, okay, this doesn't make sense, or okay, this is just a bad idea. So, let's say Mark calls in for an order. I'll play the physician. He calls in for an order and says, hey, I want to give this guy nitroglycerin that he has with him. I think it's the right thing to do. I've got my 6 rights. We'll talk about all that stuff later. And he's expecting a yes or no. I tell him, I want you to shove a toothbrush in the patient's ear, bristle side first. Does that make any sense at all? Is it potentially harmful? Absolutely. Toothbrushes don't go in ears. So what do you think probably happened? What probably happened is you misunderstood what I tried to say. Or you're speaking to someone who has no idea what they're doing, one of the two, right? So repeat that back and make sure, is this actually what the person said? If it is, they may not have a piece of information that they need to be able to do this. One occasion I had was, I had a guy who had a beer. By our protocol, we can't give pain meds to anybody who's been drinking. He was a guy my size that had 1 beer. Rolled his ATV, broke his collarbone. I wanted to give him some pain meds. So I called in and said, hey, this is just, kind of a procedural step. I know this is the right thing to do. I just need clearance to give this guy pain meds. So at the time we did reports over the phone, I heard the nurse put the phone down, and I heard her yell over to the doctor, hey, Medic 2's got somebody that has been drinking and they want to give him pain meds. Are you okay with that? What do you think the doctor said? No. Absolutely not. So I need to speak directly to the physician. He didn't have a piece of information that he needed to make that decision. Okay? And then I quickly got the order afterwards. Every once in a while, you're going to get an order that you know is wrong. And the physician swears, no, this is what it is. I want you to do this. But you are absolutely 100% sure that this is the wrong thing to do. You do have the ability to refuse an order and just say, no, we're not going to do that. I think it's unsafe or whatever. Now, that being said, what did you just do when you told that physician to go get bent?
You took liability.
Absolutely. It's all on you now, right? And if it goes bad, they're going to say, you had a doctor tell you not to do this, yet you did it anyway. You had better be very, very sure that you're right. Okay? But keep in mind, you do have the option to refuse an order if that nightmare situation happens. Knock on wood, haven't had to do that. You ever had to refuse an order, Scott? It's incredibly rare. Usually, if you just simply talk it out, they'll find out, oh, okay, I didn't realize this when you get the order. Yes, sir.
If you can refuse an order to not do something, can you refuse in order to then actually end up doing something then?
Well, like if a doctor says, under no circumstances are you to do this, and you know it's the right thing to do, technically, yes, you can refuse that order. But, again, you are accepting full liability for anything that happens, even if it was the right thing to do. And it just happens to go bad. So, is it theoretically possible? Absolutely. Is it a good idea? But you may be in that situation.
You want to tell them that you refuse?
Yes, absolutely. You want to relocate and give them your reasoning why. A lot of times, if you're like, no, Dr. So-and-so, I think that's absolutely the wrong thing to do. That's going to cause patient harm. Here's why I am going to refuse this order. As the physician, they're hearing this like, oh, how dare he? Oh, okay, I didn't realize this. And then it's, oh, okay, I didn't realize this. Now the whole situation goes away. Make sense? So, special situations. Things where you need to start notifying people. Hazmat, rescues that are in progress, mass casualty, things that they need to mobilize resources, right? You need to give them early notification of that. We'll use a multiple casualty incident. So let's say we're going to an incident that, okay, there was a, God forbid, a school shooting. We have 300 pediatric patients with multiple gunshot wounds. How many people do you think are going to get involved in that at the hospital level? Take a guess. Thousands. By the time it's all said and done, thousands of people are going to be involved in that response. How long do you think it takes to wake up thousands of people?
Sure.
So as soon as you realize, hey, this may be something very, very big, start notifying people, hey, just heads up. It may be nothing, but it may be our nightmare, okay? Put that thing out there early. So, if it is one of those where you have multiple patients, give them an estimate of the number of patients. We'll talk about category of patients. We'll cover that in way more detail when we get to mass casualty. You guys will actually do an MCI. We're going to have you moving real patients. You will go home tired. You will go drained, and you'll probably go home and drink. At least the ones that are old enough to drink. The ones that aren't old enough to drink are going to
Smiling.
You will go home tired. But if you guys are going to have one that goes bad, I want you to have one here where nobody actually dies. Okay? Every system will have a plan. You're going to want to follow that. Okay, so all this equipment, we do need to take care of it because the radio, again, I read there, the radio is your lifeline. Never have it farther away from than you can reach because that's your lifeline to the world. Okay, if you need something you need right now, that's your key to get it. So we need to take care of that equipment. So beginning your shift, make sure that the radio works, that the battery's charged up, that you have a spare battery at least accessible, things like that. If you have a radio failure, have a backup plan, whether that be a different radio system, cell phone, or just simply reverting to standing orders. Have a copy of your standing orders there in case that does happen. Even if you get all the way down to smoke signals, okay, but have a backup plan for your backup plan. All right, so we'll do some review. So, healthcare providers force their cultural values onto their patients because they believe their values are better. They are displaying which of these four? My beliefs are right, and I'm going to make you do them.
D.
All right, so we got a little bit of discussion between D. David and B. Boy, right? Who thinks B. Boy? This is where people put their hands up. I heard somebody say B. Nobody said it? Okay. Did I hear an A now? Oh, now you're just messing. Think A? All right. D. David. A is very close. You go back to that. Ethnocentrism. That is where I believe my beliefs are the best. But when you go the one step further and you force them on someone else, it's cultural imposition. Kind of a dubious distinction, but. All right, so you're communicating with an older patient. Which of these should you do? What do we want to do with Granny? Discussion? It is. All right, so you got a 5-year-old in respiratory distress. Which of these should you do for him?
D.
Absolutely. Any discussion, you're wrong. Okay, 4. Okay, so you got what pieces of patient information is of least pertinence when giving a verbal report to a nurse or physician? What means the least?
B.
Any discussion? Good, because you'd be wrong. All right, which of the following statements is true about a PCR?
B.
Okay, so I heard a B and a C. Who thought B? All right, who thought C? Any other answers that you think? okay, Funky. So again, so we go back to this, it absolutely is a legal document.
Yep.
It is used for patient billing. And is it intended only for the pre-hospital care provider? Absolutely not. It goes all the way up the chain. But absolutely, it does ensure efficient continuity. Okay, so that's that patient's record throughout the whole process. Things like, there are times where something we do in the field can greatly affect what happens hours, days down the road. Probably the easiest example of that would be a tourniquet. So if I put a tourniquet on somebody's leg, they've got about 6 hours before blood flow has to be restored, or they end up losing the limb. But if I cover that up with a bunch of blankets and nobody finds it and I don't pass it on, are they ever going to restore that? Nope. All of a sudden, oh, holy crap, this leg's going black. What's going on? It's very important we put that information down. All right, so device receives a low frequency signal. That shouldn't be frequency, that should be a low magnitude signal. And transmitted at a relatively high magnitude is called what? Absolutely. So you're treating a potentially hostile patient. How do you diffuse that situation? No, it's absolutely D. You tell them, listen, pal, I'm going to punch you in the face. Yeah, absolutely.
In your own hand.
The other thing is you make sure the guy's smaller than you before you do that. All right, so which of the following functions are the functions of a dispatcher? Oh, sorry, which one is not that? Any discussion? Did I hear a B in there? Nope, perfect. So you receive an order from medical controller radio. What should you do? Any discussion? Beautiful, you guys can be taught, I love it. So, request medical direction for a patient who's involved in a major car accident. What should you avoid? Which one of those would we not want to do?
Hey.
Absolutely. Because that physician may not have any idea what a 1050 or a signal 26 is. Allen County, here we're down there, signal 26. Funny story with that, I was doing a clinical time during my basic class. I hopped on the unit and we got sent to a signal 26. I'm like, I have no idea what that is, but it sounds cool. Turns out it was an auto accident. Up here we call them 1050s. Down there they call them signal 26s. As we pull up to the scene and stop, I hear medic 2, signal 9. To me, what does that mean up here? Disregard. I'm like, shh, man, so close. They're like, are you going to get out of the truck? I'm like, what are you talking about? We've been disregarded. He goes, no, you idiot. We just called on scene. Signal 9 down there is the term on scene. All right, so, we already did that one. Ooh, pink. Okay. So, for the sake of time, we're not going to do the repeater one because it takes a lot of time. We may do it if we have some extra time at another time, but we don't right now. What we are going to do is the witness statement exercise. And before we get started, I want to kind of tell you what you guys are doing here, okay? So, I want you guys to have an option or an ability to practice documenting things. One big problem, I haven't taught you medicine yet. So if I give you a patient care scenario, you're not going to know whether it's right or wrong, right? Most of you anyway? Yeah. So one of the other things we do that we have to document very meticulously is we a lot of times have a first class seat to things happening. A lot of times it's we're actually documenting for law enforcement. We're giving a witness statement. What did you see? What did you hear? Blah, 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 right? So what we're going to show you is a video of a police action. You're going to get to see it once, and then some point before next class, I want you to write a witness statement. It can just be on regular paper, doesn't have to be anything fancy, but just simply write what happened. After a couple weeks, we're going to give you guys a deposition. We're going to have you guys do a deposition on it, which means you're going to have to testify, for lack of a better term, about what you saw. probably aren't going to remember it, right? So you're going to want to document well, all right? Some things about this, okay? This type of video, and you'll see why when I show the video, it's kind of hard to get my hands on a good copy. It's not things that get recorded very often. So you're going to be looking through the body cam of an officer. I want you to assume that that is your point of view. You are there on a standby for this, for a confused patient. That's what you were sent there for. You get there, and police are already on scene, and they're telling you to stay in your truck. You're just watching, okay? So what you see is your point of view for the sake of the exercise. That being said, the officer who actually has that camera on still does exist. Okay, so you're not taking that person's role, you're just simply looking through that body cam, because I don't have video from the other perspective. Does that make sense to everybody? A lot of heads going up and down, right? Okay. All right. No paper out. Are you guys going to have paper when you're sitting in your truck? Watching what is going to be yet another BS run?
Yeah, but I'm tough for it. So he's swinging the knife around. So, our option was, okay, he goes to the window and talks to the theater. He pops out that car.
Before we get too far, everybody can hear what he's saying, right?
He by himself? Yeah. It looks like it. I can't see in the back seat. Where? Figure out if he's by himself there first. Try to pop that back window out. Let's go on the passenger side. Hey, I'm going to take the passenger side. Okay. Fine, I'm going to stay with you. Watch crossfire, man. When can you see if there's anything in there? What's up that back window on the side? Or take the rear windshield so you get a little more. Watch the crossfire. Watch the crossfire. Lower left, buddy. Settle down. Put your gun away. You got you. Stay put. Drop the knife! Drop the knife! Stay back, stay back. He's coming out. He's coming out. He's coming out. Drop the knife! That's pretty much rocket traffic. You got two soldiers coming out with a knife. What do you want? Shots fired. I got cover.
All right. When you go home tonight, I want you to write a witness statement. And then when we get done, we'll give you the rest of the story. That is an actual incident. That did not. I won't give you that. It became interesting. I'll leave it there. All right. So go ahead and take a break. And it is 20 after right now, so let's be back by 7:30. Okay. Didn't think you were going to watch it on your shot. If you wanted to write off just as an observer, first thing get a hold of the chance. I can email you. You get to see it being taught.
So did I just raise early in my communications for no reason?
Yeah, that's I'm you're joking, right? Well, I guess I'm ahead of you.
Well, that's what she thought was the turns out pharmacy put the wrong customer. No, they're not the bottle, but the box, the blue bottle.
Yeah.
So she thought she grabbed one, actually she grabbed one. It was, either 10 or 100 times.
There's fine.
Only because she didn't bother having it.
Yeah.
It's right there on the label. Just look at it. So, also, the industry took it away. We should not have this happen again. So they requested me to
I think I'm gonna go.
look at.
But,
Partner to that. This word should start with a. For what you would be writing as an observer at that time, because it wouldn't be part of the class yet. So what would you do? You can't have anything. Because you're not there as a student. That'd be no different. The last one I had was a high school kid. So she just said, I watch. You're limited to what you can do, but you need to have a first class seat, watch things happen. You need to pick your brand. Yes, we need to know where to stay. She sends it off to her corporate, who then sends you a packet, you fill out, you send it back. So it'll be like you're cleared to go, you have all the right immunizations, all that kind of stuff.
Well, my dad is really
Usually we try to have. So that I try to get it around here. It's not, it's nowhere near as.
I was actually a first responder.
So yeah, it's nowhere near as your class. Like when you're doing your class, it's gotta be this spot, it's gotta be this time. You have to be sitting on yeah, I'll shoot that stuff to you. You'll be able to have it from there. I just try. Video okay. I made no guarantees for like technical problems and all that. The video quality sucks because I have to compress the switch. I get it.
Right, yeah. Couldn't find it. Yeah. Yes, I got five.
Well, even in bars, I'm looking
I work there, so you know.
Well, hey, you got that anyway. Yeah, this is.
Directly at the bus driver.
Not really this one. Yes, sir.
I feel like he was just like, and she's like, she's like, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I'm like,
Some of them aren't gonna say word for word. We covered that on the PowerPoint. That's the blood test version of it.
There's one letter difference. It's not A, B, it's just that.
The other day, you need FTP. Right.
I was like, wait, that looks like, that is bios.
I've had it in there. Okay, so you're thinking radio systems. What type of radio sends a signal?
Only some of them, only some of them.
I would even say it transmits a signal.
Look back to chapter 15.
We just covered it a little while ago. Okay, repeaters made of both these types. So you're looking for things that transmit a signal and things that receive a signal.
Like she said that in class, and then we're like, what does that mean?
What part of the two-way radio transmits the signal? When you get this answer, you'll be like, oh my God, how did I overlook this? Transmit. It receives a signal? Receives. So, yeah. Some of the stuff you have to kind of luck. Again, we talked about the other night, the whole point of this is every single one of those lines will be filled in. Probably not. It's a 5 to 6 scale. We're not 5. I'm very quick with the way we'll say, okay, yeah, this person understands this, or this person doesn't. And then it grades it.
Radio.
Some of it too, that the technology is way past the simple concepts. So it's kind of easy to kind of get the transmitter, because you're thinking, okay, yeah, you're way beyond it. So sometimes you have to kind of go all the way back.
But on that wiki page, yeah.
You see all that?
What you recommend?
What I see is,
The way, basically what it's going to be is that going to go report it? Absolutely. So you guys, they got a police. Yeah. Your job is simply to state who saw her. Juries will make decisions from objective witness. I can't stage someone getting shot. So I have to use this in some way. So yeah, in this scenario, there's not gonna be this video, because why bother doing this? It's just, this is a way to be able to let you guys see this. You guys will be amazed how hard it is to pull the details out after you forgot about it for a little while. And I always ask you to go, well, can we watch it again? I'm like, yeah, we'll revive this guy, put him back in the car. That's not the way it works. Yeah, we'll do it all over again. Yes.
What chapter? Because it was book of chapter 3, but that's
On the PowerPoint, it's chapter 8. Yeah, I think it's chapter 8 in the workbook as well. It should be at the very end, I know that.
well,
Yeah, and there is, and we were kind of talking about this last night. The reason for that is I had a lot of this stuff in the different version of the book where they rearranged the chapters. In order to make them all match up, we had to buy the instructional resources, which cost about $700. What are we going to have to do with that cost? Pass it on to you guys. So in order to be able to keep the classes low cost as we can, we're kind of, the PowerPoints are from one version, the workbooks from another. It's all the same information.
It shows right
But
in
it makes
front.
it work with the class up.
It shows in the front, it tells you which chapter.
So
If you look at the headline of the chapter in the workbook, and then just look it up in the front of the book, it will tell you what chapter.
yeah, so the big thing is follow the subject matter, not the number. Okay? All right, we got everybody back? Rock on. All right, so what we're going to go into here is probably the chapter that, one, confuses people the most, and two, generates the most test questions. A lot of stuff comes out of this chapter because there's some very convoluted and sometimes hard to understand concepts that are part of this chapter. So, at the very basis of our profession is a promise to do no harm. You'll probably hear people say primum non nocere. If you ever, in Latin class, lawyers love Latin. What that means is do no harm. So everything is guided off that principle. We don't want to make the situation worse. Where we get into trouble is if we break that rule. So sometimes it happens, even though we don't mean it to. What we mean by that is we're acting in good faith. We're doing the best we can with what we have to work with. There's going to be times where you're called to do something and you may not necessarily know all of what's going on, and something bad will happen, not because you made a bad decision, but because you made a decision based off incomplete information. What we would need to do to avoid legal problems is act according to the appropriate standard of care. The standard of care is what's expected of you. So what someone who is similarly trained in a similar situation would do. So I guess we'll kind of put this into action. If this door was open and it was 10 degrees outside, what would be expected of me as an employee? To shut the door, right? Anything other than that would be not adhering to that standard of care, that expectation. It's a very simple example, but you kind of see where I'm going. So we most of the time are going to be the first link in the chain of pre-hospital care. Is it at an EMT level? Sometimes the EMRs are there, sometimes they're not. We're very early in the chain. So that gives us some obstacles that we need to overcome because people haven't already done it for us yet. The biggest one being is the idea of consent. And remember in the last presentation I talked about how the patient has the right to tell you to go get bent? In our great country, that is just that. They don't even have to be making what you would think would be a good decision. They just have to be informed about it and have decision-making capability. We'll talk about that a bit later. But the real take-home is we as providers have to get the patient's consent to do something. Otherwise, we can't touch them. They have to give some sort of consent. We'll talk about different types of consent. So if the patient is conscious and rational, and we'll talk about decision-making capacity, they have the legal right to refuse care. So the foundation of that is that just that, the decision-making capacity. Is this person able to take information? First off, do they have the information? Second, are they able to take that information and make a quality decision from it? I didn't say a decision that you agree with. Jehovah's Witnesses are probably a really good example of this. They very, very rarely will you get them to accept blood products, even if they're currently bleeding to death. You know, they don't do it on a religious basis. So even though I don't agree with that decision, I think it's absolutely ridiculous, I have to honor that decision because that call is not mine to make. Okay. That boils down to the idea of patient autonomy, which is the ability to make decisions for yourself. Would you want someone else making all of your medical decisions for you? Okay, so if you do, just think about it and be like, okay, well, hey, that person may decide it's cheaper to sterilize you early because then you don't have kids. Makes perfect logic, right? But is that something you want done to you? Probably not. You have the right in our great country to have autonomy and say, no, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. The first type of consent we'll talk about is by far the easiest one, and it's also by far the most common one, which is expressed consent, which is quite simply the patient tells you, yes, I want you to do this. On your clinicals, a lot of times you'll hear people just simply ask, okay, hey, I got to ask you this, but do you want us to take you to the hospital? Even though it's pretty obvious that's what they want, we're obtaining consent. So to be valid, we can't just simply, hey, you want me to do this? We have to make sure that the patient understands what they're saying yes to. So, would you like a cricothyrotomy? I really think it's important.
Good.
Okay. You know what a cricothyrotomy is?
It's not.
Okay. Then how can you possibly give a rational decision about whether you want one? The cricothyrotomy is that's what you throw with them. Probably not good idea. So the thing is that person has to understand the risks and benefits and the implications of what they're agreeing to. Okay? That responsibility falls to us as providers to make sure we provide them with that information in an objective manner. The next type of consent is implied consent. And it applies to people who are unable to provide express consent for themselves. People who are unconscious, incapable of making an informed decision, the mentally handicapped, children, stuff like that, people that aren't able to legally make decisions for themselves. It only applies if there is some sort of risk to life or limb. So it can't be for elective things. I can't come up to Jason and say, you know what, I'm a plastic surgeon and my daughter just got admitted to Harvard, so I need some money. So I'll be like, hey buddy, I'm going to imply consent that you want plastic surgery. I'm going to give you boobs. I can't do that, right? That's nowhere near right. So there has to be some sort of risk to that patient's health to be able to imply consent. What that really boils down to is what's called the emergency doctrine, which means, okay, if a reasonable person was in this circumstance, they would want help. So if Yvonne had just been shot in the chest and is unconscious, he's probably going to want help, right? He just can't express it. So if he was able to express it, you would say, absolutely, fix my chest, right? You're just physically unable to. So that's kind of the two different ways of saying the same thing there, right? So you have to get consent in some means. Implied consent sometimes is your answer. Sometimes you can actually get consent from a spouse or a relative. if they had legal means to give that. We'll talk about POAs and stuff here in a little bit. Even if you're working under implied consent, like let's say it's a little kid and you have a sibling that's there as well, you can real quick get, is it legally viable? No, but it kind of makes it look good. That, okay, well, yeah, I'm working under implied consent, but even a family member who was here said, yeah, this is a good idea. It's just kind of that next level of protection for yourself. So the next one we'll talk about is involuntary consent. That is where we're doing things against their will. This, luckily, is pretty rare because you want to know what comes with this? Well, that, possibly, but what's going to come with it more,
Liability.
more pressingly, as far as immediately, is a fight. You're going to put hands on people here, right? If I want to take somebody to the hospital that doesn't want to go, I'm going to have to physically grab them and take them to the hospital. Okay? But luckily, it's pretty rare that we have to invoke this. So some examples of people that be the mentally ill, people who are suicidal, people that are in a behavioral crisis, excited delirium or drug ingestion, things where they're really whacked out. We have to take them against their will. Developmentally delayed, as far as people who are mentally handicapped or they don't understand the situation, we may have to take them against their will. We can obtain consent from a guardian. Hopefully they're available to do so. That actually turns it into an express consent thing. But every once in a while they're not available, so we have to do an involuntary thing. Going back to this, I'm going to kind of poll you guys and see if you can get this one. Who has the authority to detain someone against their will? Anybody else? Do we have authority to do that? This guy's really sick. He needs to go. He's also drunk. I'll use the
For
example.
safety issues, you might be able to. For others.
I had a guy once who he shot himself in the head with a nail gun. Been drinking heavily. Imagine that. Didn't want to go to the hospital. He's like, no, fine. I just want to go lay down. Leave me alone. Do I have the right to take him against his will?
Safety. I think you should be able to. For the safety, that nail could have penetrated deeper into these things.
Legally, we do not have the authority to detain anyone. We do have the right to keep them from hurting themselves until we can obtain help from law enforcement. The only people that will show up on a scene that have legal rights to detain someone is the police officer.
What about medical direction? Can they,
Only people that you have available to you that have legal right to detain someone is the police officer.
is that guy have office through in town when he refused to be transported? Having a bag, rim, fully, all,
The whole rigmarole.
and he
Nope,
was
I
very
won't.
adamant about getting back out. We ain't calling an officer back out. He got on the phone with medical direction, and they said,
If he still would have said, I don't care what that doctor says, I'm not going anywhere. We don't have the right, we do not have the legal authority to do this.
You can hold him until the police officer gets there. If,
We
for
can
your
keep him
safety,
from,
you're
we
dictating.
can keep him from harming himself. So we can contain that person somewhere. Sometimes that's actually being hands-on with somebody. You have someone excited delirium, you have no idea what they're going to do. The only way you can keep them safe is to actually hold them down. You're not detaining them. You're keeping them from further harm. It's a dubious distinction, right? But legally, the only person that has, and that's why they're referred to as police powers, the ability to arrest people and take them against their will. So if you're doing this, who do we want to make sure we have on scene? A police officer. You see where I'm going with that. All right, so minors. Technically, minors cannot give consent because legally they are not of age to do so. So we need to get a hold of a parent or legal guardian. Now, we can work under implied consent if the emergency doctrine applies, as far as there is a risk to their life. We're legally assuming that any parent would want their child to be cared for. Interestingly enough, though, we can only do the things that will fix the immediate problem. So, yeah, I pick up a little kid who has a broken arm. And I can splint this kid's arm and take him to a hospital. But do I have legal authority to start IV and give medications? Depending on, I mean, if the patient, if the kid says, no, I'm not hurt, if there's no risk to life or limb there, that becomes an elective procedure. I don't have the authority to do that. Where that really comes into play is when you start having people get surgeries. So we have authority, we have legal consent under implied consent to splint the arm and stabilize it, but not to do the surgery. We still need to have a consent. So, in some states, there are times where a minor can give consent. Those people are called emancipated. Indiana is one of those states. Remember that not all states have a legal age of 18. Some states is 21. You're going to have to know what state you're working in. But an emancipated minor is someone who has been given authority to make their own decisions in a court of law. It has to be a legal process to get this. They can't just come up and say, I hate my parents, so I'm emancipated. It has to go through the courts. Now, people with very bad domestic situations where their family just doesn't work, they may end up getting emancipated. Runaways, things like that, sometimes they'll go through the process and get emancipated. Some quick ways into it is if you're a minor and then you get married. There are some cultures where you can get married at 15, 16 years old. Once you become married, you can go through the process and become emancipated. If you join the armed forces, if the country says if you're old enough and mature enough to take a bullet for your country, you're old enough to make your own medical decisions. Personally, I think that's just common sense. What worries me more is why are we sending 16-year-old kids to go take bullets? But that's a whole other thing. So the one that gets a little hard to differentiate sometimes is if the patient is pregnant. In Indiana, they are allowed to make decisions that pertain to their child, but not to themselves. Wow, that's easy, right? How can you possibly split those two? That's where it gets really difficult. Key to that is get the doc involved. That way you can just say, I was doing what the doc said. But, I mean, you may occasionally run into that where it's, I don't want treatment. There may be times where the physician can order them to be taken against their will. They do so by law enforcement. They go into protective custody if there's a threat to the child. It gets very, very sticky in situations like that. One other thing is the concept of in loco parentis. You may see that term. What that means is in lieu of the parents. And what that is while they're in school, who is ultimately responsible for them while they're in school? Principal. Principal of that school. If the school superintendent is there, no, still the high school principal. Or, I'm sorry, not the high school, but that particular school's principal. So they have full ability to sign for emergency treatment. They can't sign a kid up to get an elective surgery. It's meant to do that just simply so if they can't get a hold of it. So if you do have a true emergency and you're not able to get express consent in any form, you then can work under what type of consent? Implied, and then you can treat your patient. Forcible restraint. If you're taking someone against their will, most of the time you're going to have to restrain them. It is legally permissible. You're going to want to involve law enforcement. Now, there is times where you'll be restraining them before the officer may get there. Again, you're doing so to just stop things while they're coming. You're protecting them from further harm. You're also protecting yourself from further harm. So the law it gets a little gray there, but it does allow you to do that. But I strongly, strongly, strongly advise, don't restrain someone and take them somewhere against their will without involving a police officer at some point, okay? It just turns out poorly for you. You have a question, Vernon, I can see it.
Think back to our patient. He was gonna get back in his truck and leave. That was what medics were contacting control. What can we do?
In that situation, okay, if you felt he was a danger to society, that may be able to trigger the officer to say, well, no, now we're going to take him
That
into
was before
protective
the
custody.
that was before the officer was there.
You can, I hate to use the word detain, because legally it's not detaining. You are strongly encouraging him to stay still.
But once they
Sometimes
start turning
forcibly.
all leads off, they start-
The thing is, we can leave the doors of the ambulance shut, we can hurt him, we can take his keys, things like that. We're not detaining him, we're just taking away options. Here's the thing of it, what's the golden rule to all of this? On the first slide,
Safety.
first do no harm, right? By taking this guy's keys and keeping him in the ambulance, things like that, are we keeping him from harm? Who sentences people to go to jail? Juries. You have the right to a trial by your peers, right? Okay, so let's say this very scenario. I actually hold this guy down. And he bumps his head and gets hurt, blah, 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 and sues me. You guys are on the jury. Are you sending me to jail? Right? So, kind of keep that in mind as well. That, okay, you're going to have to convince a jury of your peers that you did something so badly that you deserve to be punished. And we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. So, big thing with forcible restraint is know your local laws and ordinances, and also your company, your service policy about forcible restraint. Usually this is one of those things where you want to involve a senior member of your department, if at all possible. Get people involved, okay? Because restraint really should be kind of one of the last resorts. Because not only is it a legal, dubious area, a gray area, it's also, you have to put hands on these people. You're basically signing up to get in a fight with this person, right? People get hurt when they fight. If you do use restraint, protect your patient's airway. We'll talk a lot about airway control and monitor their respiratory status. We don't want them to stop breathing. Sometimes people do that. It's kind of a pain in the butt when they do that. I wish they would stop. So, any questions on that?
On consent.
Yes.
Okay, we went to an accident, a buggy accident, and patients were there. They were going to take all 4 of these kids to the hospital because they were underage.
Mm-hmm.
And they were going to sign off. I think I heard it right. One of the kids said, call his parents. The cop said, no, they can't call the buggy back. Why? Because they said, just call my parents, and they said it'd be all right.
There's some segment of the story missing there.
Okay, they got in an accident, and they needed to be transferred to the hospital.
Okay. Are they injured?
No, yeah, but they're underage.
Okay.
The only way you can get away from that is if your parents are physically there, right?
Not necessarily. You can take a refusal over the phone, as long as you ensure that the patient, one, that you're actually speaking to the patient's legal guardian.
All right.
So, who in here is a child of divorce? Nobody? Seriously? Well, your parents are divorced?
Oh.
Okay, I was about to say, seriously? What stable relationships? Okay, but, so the thing of it is did each of your parents have the right to make decisions for you? Not necessarily. Depending on the court agreement, one of you may have full custody, one may not have. Okay, so you have to make sure, okay, is this actually a patient's legal guardian? So you have to verify that. Then you have to verify that that person is making an informed decision. So they have all of the pieces of the puzzle. So it's a bit more difficult to take a refusal over the phone, but it is theoretically
But
possible.
if you couldn't get hold of their parents or they didn't show up, we have to take them since they're underage.
Yeah, because they can't legally refuse. They can't provide consent, they can't fully refuse consent. It falls then under implied consent. Because any
reasonable parent, without having the option of being consulted, would want their kid cared for. We'll talk more about that later.
You beat it before I do.
Yeah. And now you see why I said this generates a lot of questions, okay? So, refusals, your right to refuse treatment. So if you are conscious, alert, and have decision-making capacity, okay, you're able to make informed decisions. You have the right to refuse care. You also have the right to refuse portions of care. So you can say, I want you to do this, but I don't want you to do that, even if it doesn't make sense. Like I had one guy that wanted me to give him medications, but didn't want an IV. So I just sit there and talk to him about, okay, well, dummy, I can't give it to you any other way. So it was kind of this back and forth stuff, you know. So because they do have the right to only want certain portions. Where you see that a lot, if you have a patient that by the protocol needs a collar, but it's really not a good idea, it's easier to just say, you're going to refuse this, right? Than it is to go through the whole process and get the order. So rules bend. Ooh, I just said that on a recorded thing. Okay, so don't share that with anyone. So they can withdraw their treatment at any time, even after you've begun transport to the hospital. I have let patients out of my truck. We're going down the road, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, this guy changes his mind. So it's okay, hey, pull over. We pull over, I open the door. I'm like, you want out? Get out. He's like, well, you're going to take me to the hospital where it's warm. I'm like, no, you said you didn't want to go. Get out. Magically, all of a sudden, you want to go then. So, but they do have the right to say, no, I don't, at any point, I don't want to do this anymore. And we have to respect that. Even if the result is death or serious injury, the thing of it is they have to be informed and have decision-making capacity, so it's very, very rare that there would be a strong risk of death and they're still having decision-making capacity. But the big thing here is it places the burden on us to make sure that the patient understands what they're agreeing or refusing to. So some ways we can assess that is we can ask and repeat questions. So it's kind of one of those things, okay, Sarah, I want to start an IV on you. You're like, no, I don't want that. That's not good enough. I have to say, okay, so you understand that by refusing this procedure, I no longer have access to give you medications, and let's say you had a seizure. You have another seizure, now I need to get that access while you're seizing, which makes it much more difficult and lower probability of it happening. You may stop breathing and die during that procedure, and this may very well end up resulting in your death. So, do you understand that? So then that person was, okay, yes, I do understand. Okay, great. Repeat back what I just said. So there's, you want to try to get them, do they truly understand what you're saying? Because anybody ever watch Family Guy? Okay, the maid, what's her only word she knows? No. I have no idea whether she knows what I'm saying, right? But the word she knows is no. So I have to make sure that she understands that. Also observe their behavior. You want to try to figure out, okay, are they acting rationally? So if they appear confused or delusional, like, no, I don't want the IV because the devils will come out and hurt me if I get one, be like, stop, wait a minute, what? Is this person making rational decisions? The one you'll run into most commonly are suicidal patients. They cannot be regarded as having decision-making capacity. If they say they want to hurt themselves, legally they no longer have decision-making capacity. Which puts us in kind of a sticking point, right? Because let's say I get called to Mike and he's saying, this is a big misunderstanding, I'm fine, I don't want to go anywhere. But in the process, Elmer's on scene too, and he says, no, I heard him say, as soon as he leaves here, he's going to go put a gun in his mouth. Is he suicidal?
He swears, no, we were just fighting. I'm not going to hurt myself. It was just a big misunderstanding. Is he suicidal enough that I take him against his will? Good. Nobody put up a definite yes or no. Okay. Because it's the thing. We don't know. So this is where it gets really sticky. We have to start getting law enforcement and docs involved and all this stuff to try to figure out, is this person, are we going to actually say, yes, they're suicidal? So you may find a lot of times where you're on scene for a long time. Actually, I just had this happen last week. It was a he said, she said. I ended up calling and finally getting an order to accept the refusal. Because we're going to be here all week trying to figure out whether this person actually did or did not take pills. So, you know how I said first do no harm is kind of rule 1? Rule 2 is that providing treatment is a much more defensible position than failing to treat it. You will get in trouble for not doing things. So, we'll go back to this, okay, the person says they're suicidal, this person says they're not, la 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 la. If I take this person to the hospital and it turns out they're not suicidal and they sue me, again, but you guys, you're in the jury box, are you sending me to jail? Now flip that on its ear. He says, no, I'm not suicidal. I'm like, fine, whatever, sign here. I'm on scene a whole 7 minutes. I get back in the truck, 4 hours later, he puts a shotgun to his mouth. Put yourself in the jury box, you gonna put me in jail? A lot more possibility of that, right? So again, it's much more defensible to say, I'm gonna go ahead and do this because I'm trying to avoid harm than it is to not do things. With the understanding that you don't have to endanger yourself. At no point are you required to not go home at the end of your shift. Okay? Your safety is paramount. So if it's something that it is a true danger to yourself, you no longer have what we call a duty to act, which we'll cover here in a little bit, which means you don't have to do anything. Okay? It just all stops until you can make it safe. So get law enforcement. If you are going to be doing a refusal before you leave, encourage. Come on, buddy, seriously, let's go. It's so much easier, blah, blah. I've had sometimes where I've told patients, listen, I'm paid by the hour. I work a 24-hour shift. I'm 45 minutes into my shift. I'm not leaving until you go to the hospital. And when I get done at the end of my shift, there's a person going to come in here and replace me, and they're on a 24-hour shift, and they're not going to leave until you go to the hospital. So one of two things is going to happen. You're going to go to the hospital, or we're going to die. You're going to die of old age right here. And you just wait them out. Okay? But again, just encourage. We were on scene for like 4 hours on that run. But it was a guy that was like risking, it was crazy. He was doing like 90 miles an hour down a residential street, almost hit 3 kids, that kind of thing.
Have you ever had anybody tell you to get out of their house?
Absolutely.
Like they didn't want to leave, and so what happened there? You get a police officer involved because of the...
Absolutely. It's get out of my house or I'm going to hurt you. It's, okay, I get out of the house because he says he's going to hurt me. I make a phone call or a radio call for an officer. They come in, they secure things, and we come right back into it. Yeah. So again, it's that duty to act, and we'll cover that here in a second. That ends until you can make it safe again. And then you have that duty to act again. Ask them to sign a refusal care form. If they refuse, have a witness sign. Who's the world's best witness?
Police officer.
Police officer. Then document, all the way down to you're putting the patient's words in quotations. Okay, which anything the patient says that you're documenting should go in quotations. So you can put curse words in a chart. They just have to be in real quotations. We all giggle when we do it. Yep, we love it. But yeah, you can do that. But document. Every single little thing. Any questions on refusals? At least to know, but you'll probably have a bunch later. Yeah.
Hey, we call up the parent and with alcohol involved. And he said, I don't want to go.
It's kind of the same pinch that you're in with suicidal patients. Is you have to determine, does he have decision making?
Shouldn't we get the police officer involved there, and he can...
Absolutely.
With alcohol driving drunk, that's automatically...
Here's the thing. When you start involving law enforcement, talk to your cop first. The reason I say that is I've watched this happen so many times, and I cringe every time I see it, where it's, listen, you're going to the hospital. You're either going to go with us, or you're going to go with that cop. He's probably going to take you to jail. So, you want to go or not?
Right.
Well, yeah, one, you're really threatening your patient. That's not a good idea. But two, has she broken any laws? Cops can't just come in and arrest people for no reason. So the cop may very well come in and say, no, I'm not taking her anywhere. She's broken the laws. Talk to your cop first and make sure, before you go waving that big stick around, make sure that you actually have that stick to wave around.
But I get really frustrated if you're trying to provide patient care, and the cops are trying to get in there and put the drug test in their mouth too. But.
Everybody has their own job to do? Yeah. A lot of it boils down to, it's just good communication back and forth. So if it's, the cops just really want to get in there, that kind of thing, hey, I tell you what, as soon as we get the ambulance, we can get that done. That kind of thing. Or, if they're breathing really poorly, be like, I know you want this, but I can't, I got to get treated first. I'm trying to think of a really good way to say this. They have a job to do and they want to get it done, but at the same time they realize that you have a job to do and you want to get it done. So it may boil down to, okay, well, hey, okay, all right, well, as soon as we get the ambulance, we'll do this. And maybe, no, I need this right now. So then you have to kind of have the decision of, okay, is really that one breath into this tube going to be what keeps me from treating? Is he going to die if I take 15 seconds? So you kind of have the back and forth. It is frustrating, but if it becomes too big of an issue where it's like it's happening all the time, that's one of those where you take it up to the next level and have administrators start talking to each other. So, confidentiality. Information that is confidential or protected health information is patient history, their assessment findings, any treatments that you do, basically anything that happens, really. And if it's not in the newspaper, probably you shouldn't be talking about it. You really can't disclose that information unless the patient signs a release and says, yeah, you can do this. If it's legally subpoenaed, or if it's needed by billing personnel or operational personnel, like in order to continue care. Okay. So if your patient tells you, yeah, I just did 4 lines of cocaine, can we tell his sister that? No. Can we tell the nurse that? Absolutely. If it's the nurse that's going to be caring for him. Can we go around into the lounge and say, everybody, we just brought in this guy to do 2 lines of coke? No. Because of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996, otherwise affectionately known as HIPAA, which is we can't talk about it law. Again, this uber important. Okay, you can't break this one. You're going to lose your job if you do. Okay, loose lips ruin careers. The whole big thing is remember that anything that's protected health information or PHI has to stay confidential. You may be legally mandated to report things. That's where you start getting subpoenaed, or if it's a mandatory report situation, like what type of things are mandatory reports. Talked about it in the last section. What are times that we mandated to report things to somebody?
Abuse.
Any sort of abuse. How about if I shoot somebody?
Crime.
Okay, any felony? FIDO. Dog bites. Okay, battery kind of falls under the felony again. All right. All right, good. You were listening. Awesome. All right, so questions on that? I don't want to beat that dead horse too long. Don't say stuff that is protected. We'll move into advanced directives. Advanced directive is the patient's words while they're able to put them out there, expressing their wishes should they become unable to express them. That can be all the way from, I want to have IV nutrition, up to I don't want resuscitated. So again, it's a big umbrella term. The one we run into most often is a do not resuscitate order, a DNR order, which actually in Indiana is referred to as a post. And Later on, you guys will have to do a class through IDHS online about posts. Unfortunately, there's no way around it. You just have to do their class. I know it sucks, but it's what it is. But it's saying if I become pulseless, I'm not breathing, and I'm unresponsive, I do or do not want you to have heroic efforts. So do I want CPR? It can be more specific than that, and if you run into that in nursing homes where it's, we actually still have places that do what they call a chemical code, which is you give medications but no CPR and no intubation. So we resuscitate the crap out of your elbow because it's not moving anywhere. I think it's so silly that we still do that. The real take home here is if the patient has a DNR, the DNR does not apply to anything until they are pulseless, not breathing, and unresponsive, until they are clinically dead.
So it has to be all three.
Yes. So we'll take this, one step further. It's like, okay, so I have someone who has a DNR, they're in a nursing home, they're breathing 12 times a minute, they have a pulse, but they're unresponsive. What type of, how many things could be causing that? Laundry list, right? Most of them pretty easy to fix. So we still treat that patient. Okay? So again, a DNR does not mean do not treat. Now there will be times where a DNR will play into treatment, things like stroke care. Now it doesn't really affect our treatment. We still take them in like we always do. But once they get into the hospital, they may not do a in-depth brain surgery for someone who isn't likely to live 3 months longer anyway. Okay, but that's really outside of our scope, but you may see that from time to time. There may be times where we bring somebody in quietly that we would ordinarily bring in licensed siren because they have a DNR, but that's after a conversation with the physician. Simply because, if the person doesn't want to be resuscitated, do we want to risk life and limb for us to get them somewhere so that we don't have to resuscitate them? You see what I'm saying?
Do we have to visibly see the DNR to not?
I'm going to tell you, book answer, yes. You have to see it, make sure that it's signed by the physician, signed by the patient, and it's no more than 6 months old. That's the book answer. Now that being said, if, let's say we arrive on scene, somebody, she's 105, she's in cardiac arrest, but she's at her sister's house. So there's 10 family members there. They're all saying, we know for 100% sure she has a DNR at home. We just simply don't have it with us. Our attorney's on the phone. He says that, he signed it, blah, blah, blah. Overwhelming evidence that this document exists. Then all you have to do is call it back. Can you do it by standing order? No. Can you? By online medical direction? Absolutely. The key to it there, as far as calling for orders, you can kind of do whatever you want as long as you convince the doctor to say, yes, it's a good idea. Because then you're following their order. Okay, so there's situations like that where it's ordinarily we can't. All you have to do is just add in that step of calling a physician, and then you'll be able to. So does that answer your question? So some other names you might see thrown around about there is, again, the physician emergency scope of treatment. That's what it's called. It's what it's called in Indiana. We have patients from other states, so they may not always see that. Living wills and healthcare directives. So a living will. A living will and a post or a DNR are not the same thing. A living will is just simply the patient saying something now that they can't say later. I have a living will. If I drop right now, I want you to do CPR, okay? I don't foresee me needing CPR anytime soon. But if I become a potato, I don't want to be Terry Shiloh. Okay, that's probably a reference way too old for some of you guys. I don't want to be kept alive artificially. Okay, so EMS treatment, does that make any difference at all that I have that living will? Absolutely not. It just plays into care later on. So again, keep in mind the two are not the same thing. Some DNR things that have to be there in order to make it truly a legal document is the statement of medical problems. It has to be, this is why they have the DNR. Usually it's some sort of terminal illness. A signature of the patient or their legal guardian if they're unable to sign for themselves. Signature of the physician, and in Indiana it's 6 months. It has to be within that. They have to get renewed every 6 months. So I can't go out and say, I always joke with people, I shouldn't say joke, I tell people, my 65th birthday present to myself is my post-form tattoo on my chest. If I'm 65 and pulseless, I'm done, just let me die. Okay? That's my personal beliefs, but the thing of it is, can I get that done now? I can get a tattoo, it's worthless, but I can get a tattoo. I would have to have a physician's signature over and over again. So that's always a joke between my doctor and I, that I have to get tattooed a bunch of extra spots for her to sign it. So again, it has to be, because people's minds change, right? You may also hear it called a physician order for life-sustaining treatment or a POLST form. It's all different versions of the same thing. Those, a lot of times, they go into a little bit further detail of, I want this treatment, but not this treatment. So they may want intubated, but they don't want CPR, or they only want medications, but not the other stuff, things like that. The same rules apply as far as verifying that they're valid, they have to be signed and all that. Some patients have named surrogates. What a surrogate is just simply another person who is authorized to make decisions for that patient. I'm technically a surrogate for my father. If my father's unable to make decisions, the next person that gets asked is me. Technically, I can force him to get treatment now if I wanted to. I would never do that because he's of sound mind, but technically I can't. Because I have what's called a durable power of attorney for healthcare. Now that being said, if I just came and asked, hey, do you have a power of attorney for your mother or whatever? You may say, well, yeah, I got one. The question is it for healthcare? Because there are powers of attorney for financial matters, powers of attorney for contracts and obligations. There's different types of powers of attorney, so make sure that you ask, okay, is this a power of attorney for healthcare? It may also in some states be called a healthcare proxy. The person may be called a proxy, or the agreement may be called a proxy. But again, it's all different versions of the same thing. As we become more and more using hospice, which I think is a great program, but it brings a lot of these in. You'll get called to a sudden death of someone who is terminal, so you'll have to kind of figure out who really has decision-making capability here. Because every once in a while, this is a nightmare scenario, but it happens a lot, is one family member says, treat them, treat them, treat them. The other family member says, no, 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 they don't want this. So then you have to kind of figure out, okay, who's really got decision-making capability here, and inevitably they're both going to have power of attorney. So then you have to have this little conversation back and forth. When in doubt, resuscitate them. Start the process, and then get a hold of the doc and let them make that decision after talking to the family. So signs of death. First and foremost, we don't investigate cause of death. That falls to a physician or the medical death investigator. All we do is simply, we don't even actually pronounce them dead. In Indiana, the coroner or deputy coroner pronounces them dead. We pronounce them non-violent. But legally, the coroner has to pronounce them. So some presumptive signs of death: they're unresponsive, they lack pulses, you can't hear heartbeats, no breath sounds or no breathing, no deep tendon reflexes, and we'll talk about this stuff when we go into cardiac arrest about how to assess for them. No eye movement, no blood pressures, cyanosis or that blue purplish color, body temperature drops, things like that. Big thing is if you see what's called, first off, body and parts. If chest is over here and head is over there, we don't need to do anything to that. Okay? We're not going to fix that. You'd be amazed how many times that does end up happening. So yeah, if you have to wait for the fire department to put your patient out before you can work on them, you have to extinguish your patient. Most likely your patient's dead. Okay. The big thing here is this picture here is what we call dependent lividity. what happens anytime a body is still and there's no blood circulation, blood flows downward toward gravity, wherever gravity is pulling on. So if they're on their face down, it's going to pull into the front of the body. If they're face up, it's going to go to the back. Whatever position is down towards the earth. And you'll see this it'll initially start as a reddened, like almost a blushed looking thing. It'll turn into this real deep, dark, kind of bruising looking deal. And it'll even go so far as when you press in, it'll leave an indent. Okay. So that's what we mean when we talk about dependent lividity. Some people may call it livor mortis. The next would be rigor mortis, or stiffening of the body. This particular person was probably on his side when he died. They rolled him onto his back. Well, his arm is stiffened. It's because of a lack of energy transfer. This comes on after a couple hours, goes away after most of a day. But it is very common that we'll walk into someone who is stiff. When you assess for rigor mortis starts in the small muscles and progresses into the bigger ones. So check things like eyelids, fingers, things like that. That's where you'll notice that stiffening first. Next is putrefaction. I guess I probably should have warned you guys about this. Anybody eat anything before they came in? That's where decomposition. Believe it or not, that lady no longer has legs. They've just kind of melted. This is a picture from the Katrina response. These people were found months after the hurricane went through. They just finally got access to their apartment. But I mean, you'll notice a lot of bloating and skin's actually starting to slough off. This is old dead. You are not going to fix it. I strongly urge you, do not touch anything. This is what you're looking at. Let the investigator come in and figure out why they're this way. You're not going to fix it. So any questions on that? Pretty straightforward. So times to call a medical examiner, or in our case we call it a coroner, but some states it's a medical examiner. If they're dead on arrival, or you call them on scene, sudden death, unexpected death, I mean previous care, any suicides, violent deaths, poisonings, accident deaths, anything that you suspect a crime, or any infant or child deaths. Infant and child deaths are actually required by law to be investigated by a coroner, even if they happen in the hospital. The coroner still has to. Rule of thumb for you guys is unless you have 110% concrete, we know what happened, there was no foul play whatsoever, there was nothing out of the ordinary, and you have a physician willing to sign the death certificate, other than that, it's a coroner's case. When in doubt, make it a coroner's case. A lot of times, I served as a deputy coroner in DeKalb County for a little over a year. There were a lot of times where I would come in and be like, okay, so what's going on? There was a death at a nursing home that just wasn't witnessed. So it would be like, okay, well, have we gotten a hold of the physician? And, well, we can't reach them because they're on vacation. The doc that's covering for them has never seen them, blah, blah, blah. That's like, okay, no big deal. We'll hold them for a day. The next morning, get a hold of the physician. They sign off, and that's the end of it. Okay, so even if it turns out to not be any big deal, if you call a coroner, the coroner's going to take care of it. Okay, so when in doubt, call for coroner. Organ donors. I think it's amazing that we're able to trade organs back and forth. And one organ donor affects roughly 200 to 300 lives. So if you're not an organ donor, I strongly suggest you give it some thought. This is one of those things that when I went to coroner school, we talked about in quite a bit of detail because they paid for a dinner. But the group that does this, the donor network, there are a little over 300,000 people that are in need of a donated tissue or organ. They do roughly 750 organ exchanges a year. So there are hundreds of thousands of people waiting for an organ that they're never going to get because there's not enough organ donors. So that's I'll climb off my soapbox, just give it some thought. It's not like you're going to be using them. If you roll up on someone who is an organ donor and you find a donor card or it's on their driver's license, your key priority is life-saving. Okay? So if you have someone who's not an organ donor, it's not like you're going to say, oh, you're not an organ donor, well, screw you, pal. okay, go ahead and treat them anyway. If you do make the decision to work someone under the auspice of possibly doing organs, this gets sticky. Here's the thing. Organs they're very, very picky about being able to take organs from people. So picky that basically they have to die in the hospital. Now that being said, organs are only a small portion of tissues that they can use. So if you have somebody on scene that you know is an organ donor, even though they may not be able to take a heart, because a heart can only survive a matter of a couple hours outside of someone. So they have to have someone there to take it out, put it in the ice, transport it. Usually they don't even transport it, they have both patients in the same place, if at all possible, to make this work, because you want that outside of the body as little time as possible. So they may not be able to transplant a heart or a big organ like that, but the portions of the heart, like the heart valves, which pediatric heart valves is by far the most common needed tissue. Corneas, eye lenses, skin grafts, things like that. Those can have a much longer timeline. So if you decide it's okay, hey, we're going to go ahead and work this person just simply for the sake of they're an organ donor, it's an all or nothing thing. So you're going to be treating them just the same as if you would for any other person that was in cardiac arrest. See what I'm saying? Okay, so it's not like well, we only do part of it because they're an organ donor. It's all or nothing. Just keep in mind that even though you do your job, they may not still use the organs, simply because it's very, very tight controls for what they need to be able to have it happen. Here's an example of a donor card. In Indiana, it's a little cardinal or a heart, depending on how old your license is, on the back side of your license. You have to be a pretty old card to get anybody that still has the half heart or the full heart. Pretty much everybody else has a cardinal. Really?
Yeah, I used to put donor underneath it.
How long have you had your license?
This one
Did they switch back?
I just got my CDO and I had to get a new one. Right up there in the front. Right there.
Okay. There for a while they were using little cardinals.
I'm only 20.
They may have switched back to it. Yeah, I say they may have switched back to ours. I know that it wasn't real popular when they did the cardinal because they only used the cardinal's butt if you were half a partial donor. So apparently they switched back to ours. But you may find some that still have the cardinal. They will have the word donor on there somewhere. So medical identification insignia or accessories, we can't really call them bracelets anymore because in order to get their bling in the right places, a lot of times it's anklets or necklaces. It could be anywhere. But they may say whether they have a DNR order, they have any allergies, any special medications, or medical conditions. Some of them that I've been seeing that I really like this is they simply have a phone number. And it says, if you need information, call this number. Because there are people with very long health histories and things. That you're not going to be able to get everything on the thing. It just says, call this person. And there's actually services that keep track of those records. So you're calling like a database. Some actually have a USB flash drive built into them. Those are especially cool. The only problem is it does kind of cause a little bit of a HIPAA issue there on an administrative level. But for us, again, we're doing no harm if we need the information. Problem is we just can't make a copy of it. So we can access it because we need it, but we can't make a copy of it and store it with the chart, if that makes sense. So keep an eye out for those things. I would love to say they're all going to look just like this, but that's just not the case. They may be all blinked out with diamonds and all that kind of thing. Maybe on ankle, wrist, around the neck. Some people carrying just cards in their wallet. It's all over the place. I love the name. It's I'm a Patient. Wah, wah, wah. Basic jokes aren't going to do better. All right. So, scope of practice. So I guess before we go any further, does everybody get that portion? No questions there? So, scope of practice. That outlines the care that you are able to provide. So it's all of the tools that you have in your toolbox. That's what you're allowed to do. That's what you're able to do. your protocols and standing orders start to dictate what you can do, what you're authorized to do. It's inside my scope of practice to do a procedure where we jab the patient's heart with a needle and draw blood off of it. Our physician doesn't want us doing it because it doesn't make sense for us to do it because we're close to a trauma center. So it's inside my scope of practice, but not inside my protocols and standing orders. You guys see the difference? So anytime you go outside of your scope of practice, you are committing the legal charge of negligence. You do not want to be charged with negligence. That's bad. Okay? That's the kind of stuff you end up having to pay fines on. It's bad. You don't want to do it. It can sometimes be a criminal offense if it's bad enough. We call gross negligence. So again, the definition of negligence is acting outside of your scope of practice. If I were to go, I'm on my way home, and I see someone along the side of the road, it's in a car accident, and I'm like, I'm going to do brain surgery because I think they need it. So I break out the Sawzall and do my thing. That is way outside my scope of practice, right? So simply by doing it, then I've committed gross negligence, and that's not going to end well for me. So very similar concept is that standard of care. That's the manner in which you're expected to behave. So back to that example of pulling blood off someone's heart. My scope of practice says I can do it. The standard of care for my area says that I shouldn't. Okay? So it's what I can do and what I should be doing. Those are the kind of the difference between them. Standard of care isn't just necessarily a law thing. It's also a little bit of local custom. For example, when we call a helicopter, very rarely do we call it to the hospital. We call it the scene. That's just a local custom. Now, can I call it to the hospital? Absolutely. But if I do so, I have to have reasoning behind it because I'm acting outside of the standard of care, which is what's accepted in this region. It may turn out to be no big deal. It may not. It all depends on how well my reasoning was done prior to it. But law does play into it some, so all the way from federal law down to local ordinances can play into this. Some professional standards, probably the biggest one being the American Heart Association CPR and ACLS guidelines. So we actually, in our area, do not conform to the AHA guidelines because we do what's called CCR. You guys have been working out, have probably seen this before where we don't do breath and all that kind of jazz. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to do yourself a favor. For this class, we conform to the AHA. I have to teach you full AHA CPR, which means we do it exactly as the book says. Once you step outside of this building, do whatever is your local protocol. In here, we have to learn this. Does that make sense? Any testing is going to be to the AHA. So you'll see times where it's done completely differently outside during clinicals than what's taught in here, but I have to teach you to that. Okay? Then the textbooks, so the Traffic Safety Association and DOT, they have their own guidelines. So sometimes the states play into as well as far as licensure. For example, you guys may have seen it. There should be an addendum in the back of your book. I believe this version does still have the addendum. Some states allow, I believe it actually be an appendix. Some states actually allow an EMT basic to intubate. Ohio is one of them. So that's specific to that state's licensure requirements that you have to be able to be tested on that. The medical director can take it back if he wants to. If you guys happen to be looking, there should be one way in the back. Big thing is for this class, we're going to teach you Indiana standards, which means you guys don't have to worry about tubing anymore. I'm meaning intubated. Okay, we do blind airways, but not visual airways. So, but again, it's just an example of what one state allows, the other doesn't. Makes sense? We're going to get into some real meat and taters here, okay? Duty to act. What that is that it's the provider's responsibility to provide care. They're legally and or ethically obliged to provide care. So what that's meaning is that by not providing care, or providing care in a different way, I am outside of the standard of care, which then I am committing negligence. Follow me? So, duty to act applies in a lot of different situations. It also doesn't apply in a lot of situations that seem counterintuitive. Sometimes where it definitely applies. If you are being paid to be in service, you then have a duty to act. So tomorrow when I come in to work my shift, I clock in. From the moment I clock in, if the pager goes off, I am legally bound to get in the truck and respond. Do I have to make scene or anything like that? If it's not safe, that's a whole other monkey there, but I'm duty bound to respond. If you have gone en route to something, you've already responded, you have to keep responding. I can't go en route to a sick person, and they're like, oh, well, yeah, actually, it's a cardiac arrest. I can't say, well, screw that, I'm going back to the station. Once I'm in, unless it becomes unsafe. That's always your out of it. Once treatment's begun, I can't just say, well, I don't want to do this anymore and leave. I'm legally bound to do so. Sometimes where you're a volunteer and you still have a legal obligation. One is once you get in a department vehicle and respond, you now have a duty to act. If you're in your POV, technically you don't have a legal obligation to respond. You may have an ethical one. So if it comes out, finds out, wait a minute, you were 30 seconds away from the scene and turned around and went home, you're going to have to explain that. It looks bad, but legally you didn't have it. But if you're in a department vehicle, you then become, you have a duty to act. So sometimes where you don't have full duty to act, it seems the other way around. So let's say I'm in uniform, which I am now. I get my truck to go home, and I come across an auto accident. There's a guy laying out on the ground, apparently not breathing. Do I have a duty to act? Okay, who says, yes, I have a legal obligation to stop? Who says that I don't have a legal obligation to stop? Okay, okay, this gentleman dies, and I am witnessed in uniform driving by. Yes, I'm in uniform. Not on duty, but I'm in uniform. So I'm witnessed driving by. You guys are on a jury. Are you going to put me? Are you going to punish me?
No,
Do I have an ethical obligation to stop? Could. It depends on your ethics. The thing is, it's very murky. Right? What's that?
Do us a favor and wear a coat on the road.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you, when I go home from work, I take my uniform shirt off. The reason being is, okay, I stop at a gas station, and I've had this happen before. I was on my way to Fort Wayne, and I wasn't even in uniform, but I was on my way to Fort Wayne. I had just graduated paramedic school. Auto accident, was a little fender bender. Nobody was really that badly hurt. I stopped. Fire department's already on scene. They're a BLS provider. I stop out. I identify myself as a paramedic. I come in, look at everybody. I'm like, hey, everybody's pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and bail. So, see you guys. They're like, whoa, 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 no, you can't leave. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? I can't. Pretty much, I can leave. They had disregarded their ALS response. He was like, no, you have to take him to the hospital. I'm like, what the hell do I do? But legally, then since I identified myself as a paramedic, I have an obligation to stay there until I can guarantee another paramedic. So I just sit there. I'm like, well, you better turn your ALS right back around and bring them here, because I'm not going to the hospital anyway. So that's why anymore.
Nurse went to an accident. nurse, and she actually had to stay there till England.
So it can get very sticky. So yeah, actually, when I go off duty, I take my shirt off, just so I don't get wrapped up in somebody else's problem. Now that being said, if I was going to cross someone, if I actually thought there was any chance of someone being life, limb kind of hurt, I'm going to stop. And I've stopped numerous times. So I mean that's kind of an example of when I don't have a legal obligation, but I do have an ethical obligation. Make sense? So, next thing we'll talk about is the reasonable person test. And what that is if someone who was similarly trained was put in a similar situation, would they perform a similar treatment plan or treatment an action? Would they do the same thing? So, again, it's just thinking, okay, is this reasonable? So it's kind of a gauge to see whether. Then we'll go back to the idea of stopping at an auto accident. If I'm identified as a paramedic and would a reasonable person stay? Absolutely. So then I'm tied to that standard that a reasonable person of my training would do so. Where that gets a little different is when you start changing training levels or experience levels. So let's say Mike and I go to the same scene. Mike goes to a scene. No, actually, I go to a scene. Sorry, I'm thinking of the scenario off my head. I go to a scene, and it's a patient who is having chest pain. And I decide, you know what, I'm going to not give this person nitroglycerin. I'm there with the ambulance. I'm like, I'm not going to give it to him. I don't want to deal with this. I'm not going to do it. And patient ends up dying. The medication that I probably should have given. Now, I know Scott's on duty tonight, so I'll pick on him. He's a similarly trained paramedic. So they're going to call him in as an expert witness and say, should he or should he not have done this? And he's going to say, absolutely, he should have done this. It's in the standard of care. That is an acceptable reasonable man test. Now, if he goes to that same scene and decides not to give nitroglycerin that he happens to have there because he doesn't think that it's within its expiration limit, he's like, I don't know, I don't know if this is the right thing. And they call me in as an expert witness. Are we going to be held to the same standard? No. Why?
You're the paramedic.
Because we're differently trained. Right? So, again, it has to be the same level of training, same thing. So now, someone who's an administrator looks at the big picture. Am I going to be held to the same standard as Bruce? Possibly, if it's not an administrative issue. If it's an issue where his specialized training played into it, well then, he gets held to a different standard. See the difference? All right, this one's very important. You guys, by the time it comes for a test, you need to be able to recite this. 4 elements to prove negligence. The first one is duty to act. Did you have to actually be there? The second would be then, you breached that duty. So you were supposed to, you were legally obligated to do something, you didn't do it. The next thing was there actual damages caused? Did this person actually have something bad happen to them? And the final thing is did what your breach of duty, was that part of the cause of those damages? So we'll kind of march through this a little bit. So I go to an auto accident, and I'm on duty in the ambulance. Do I have a duty to act? Yes. Absolutely. So I also have a duty to provide care, right? So I come up to the truck, and I see a firearm laying on the seat. I get back in the truck, drive away. Did I breach my duty?
Could I have made that safe? It's just a firearm laying on the seat.
It doesn't matter.
Patient's unresponsive.
You don't know if
He
you
could have moved the firearm, right?
Yeah,
And made it safe.
but you know if the patient's unconscious.
Okay, the patient's unresponsive.
Plain dead. Plain possible.
But that's the question you have to answer, is could I have made it safe? Okay, so let's say that I could have made it safe. But I chose not to, I chose to get in the truck and drive away. Patient dies. So were there actual damages? Absolutely. Were my actions part of the cause of him dying? Let's say he bled to death from arterial bleed. Absolutely, right? That's something I should have been able to fix. See how that kind of flows? So now let's say instead of so I drive away and yeah, so I drive away, the patient dies. Come to find out that he had died 2 hours, he died from an overdose that he took after I left the scene. He got out of the car, shot up with heroin, and died. Have I committed negligence?
No.
Why?
Because the order was the same.
What portion's missing? Approximate causation. I had no way to stop him from taking that heroin afterwards. Nothing that I did caused that because it happened afterwards. Make sense? So abandonment. Did everybody get this one just before you ever got that wrote down, recorded in some way, shape, or form? Abandonment. That is the unilateral termination of care by an EMT without the patient's consent or making provisions for continuing care at or above the same level of care. So it can take place either at the scene or at the hospital. Sometimes it can take place other places, but I think we won't go into that. The thing of it is, the real take home with this is, let's say Noah's caring for somebody. And he's working on it. I come in. I'm like, hey, what's going on? He gives me a handoff report, and I take care of the patient clearing out. He leaves. Has he abandoned that patient? Knowing what we just talked about? No. Why?
Because he gave you the information. And
He assured continuing care at or above his training level. Now, if we flip-flop places, does that stay this? Does that change? Yes, it does. Right? Because now we're going down the level of training. Right? Fantastic. All right. So assault and battery. Assault is putting someone in fear of immediately bodily harm. You haven't actually touched anyone yet, but you're saying I'm gonna. Battery is when you actually touch them, which I find hilarious because if I punch somebody in the face, what do most people say I get charged with? Assault. I didn't commit assault. I committed battery. I find that funny. So again, assault is saying it. Battery is doing it.
when you put fear in them after you do it.
After I did it, yeah. So normally the two go together. You get charged with assaulting and battery. Kidnapping. If we take someone against their will, we are, by definition, kidnapping them. Even though we fully intend to make sure that they're getting taken care of, legally, we just kidnap them. Even if we just simply hold them in place, we're at risk of a false imprisonment charge, which is we're detaining them from freely moving about to where they have the rights to do. Again, that's an unauthorized confinement. Both are illegal. How do we get around them?
They will burn themselves.
Well, there's an easier way.
I did case.
We get consent. Don't overthink it, right? We just get consent. So a lot of times when you hear a provider say, you want me to go to you want me to take you to the hospital, right? What they're doing is making sure that legally they're not doing this. They're not kidnapping the person because they've expressed consent. Make sense? All right. Now I know this is a lot of big words, and we're going to kind of review of this next time. So defamation. That is, you are purposefully putting out false information to damage the reputation of another person or organization. So if I said that I know for a fact
that 75% of patients that go to Lutheran die. Do I know that to be false? Absolutely. No place, no hospital on the planet would be allowed to keep operating if 75% of the patients die. And I did it with the sole intent of defaming their character, right? Now, if I said, I have suspicions that there are people abusing people at Lutheran, and I say it through the proper channels, is that defamation? No, that's simply whistleblowing, right? So there are two different types of defamation, libel and slander. Easy way to remember them is slander starts with an S, spoken starts with an S, slander is spoken. Libel uses letters. I'm not real bright, so that's how I remember stuff. Make sense? So how we can get caught up in defamation is a false statement on a run report, as far as saying things that are our conclusions and may or may not have actually happened, or inappropriate comments made during conversation. Simple things like, okay, so he hit you from behind, right, in an auto accident? If we don't know that's the case and we document it, again, that's a legal record, right? So they can make a case for defamation if we're trying to make them seem like they're at fault for something that they weren't. Okay, so that's one of those things where patient reported having being struck from behind. See the difference? All right, so this next one is one that you guys, again, you're going to want to really know this well. Is the Good Samaritan Law, and which grants you immunity. So what immunity is protection from legal liability. So basically, it just kind of says, okay, whether this happens or not, it's not your fault. You can be granted immunity for different reasons. Big reason we get granted immunity is the Good Samaritan Law. Oh, I just noticed some of that's red, some of it's orange. Oops, that's all supposed to be red. So, in order for a Good Samaritan, what the Good Samaritan Law is we want, if I go driving home tonight, stumble across an auto accident. We as a society want me getting out and doing what I know how to do, right? We don't want me driving by thinking, well, I can't get involved because I may get sued. So the law provides some protection for me, even if it goes badly, in an effort to get me to stop and do what I know how to do. Same thing with you guys. Once we get through, certain portions of the U.S., like, hey, even if we don't get through the portion of the class, to be honest with you, if you stop and start helping things, you'll be covered under the Good Samaritan Law, as long as you meet these 4 criteria, which is you're acting in good faith, which means you're trying to do your best. The next is you're without expectation of compensation. So I can't be expecting to be paid for doing this, because then I have a legal duty to act, and that changes things altogether. You have to act within your scope of training. So are you guys going to be able to put a combi tube in anybody? No, because you haven't been trained on that yet. Am I going to be able to do brain surgery? No. And then you didn't act in a grossly negligent manner. What that means is you were so far out of the standard of care that it was considered reckless. So if I come in and shove a toothbrush up somebody's ear, there's no way to defend that, right? There's no good medical reason for that. I am so far out of the scope of the standard of care that it was recklessly disregarded for this patient's well-being. Make sense? Okay. You have a question? I thought I saw something. Never mind. Sorry. Apparently I'm hallucinating. So, make sense? So again, we just talked about gross negligence. That's conduct that constitutes willful and reckless disregard. It is so far out of the norm that it's criminal. So when records and all the reports, when you get to these, you have to remember one gigantic thing. Any action that is not recorded legally did not happen. You don't write it down, it didn't happen. That PCR is the legal documentation of that incident from the EMS standpoint. So
let's say I'm doing an assessment and I check breath sounds and they're clear and equal. I go about the rest of my care, I hand them off. An hour later, they die from a collapsed lung. Something I should have been able to see. They're here. Okay, the absence of breath sounds. If I documented that I checked breath sounds and that they were equal, am I altering it? No. I did my assessment. I worked off what I had, information I had. If I didn't document it, can I come back later and say, well, yeah, I did it, but it was fine? Legally, no, because it never happened. So, again, an action not recorded was never performed. Make sure that you put these things in there, including what we call pertinent negatives, or things that should have been there and weren't. Okay? Along those lines, reports that are incomplete or very untidy, as far as the handwriting sucks, the spelling is atrocious, grammar is just, like it's written by a 5-year-old. So if that causes a problem. The thing of it is if I use the wrong form of who or whom in a report, are you guys going to assume I'm an idiot? I mean, who honestly knows the rules about when to use who and when to use who? Now, if my report read, he done got sick and I made him better, are you going to assume that I'm an idiot?
I made him feel good.
I made him feel good again. Yeah. Completely different ends of the spectrum, right? So, if we're okay with, okay, you should have used whom, not who, we're not okay with we done made him better. Especially if you're an electronic report, there's a little thing called spell checker. Use it. Now that being said, spell checker only assumes it knows what you want. One of the funniest scripts I ever read was a guy, he was intending to write, patient was reporting spasms all over his chest. What autocorrect turned it to was patient was reporting sperms all over his chest. Those are two completely different runs, aren't they? So again, read through your chart before you submit it. NEMSA system, it's a national system in order to be able to collect information. Information that goes into your chart will eventually be uploaded into NEMSA. It allows us to spot trends, things like that. So mandatory requirements, we talked about some of this before. Any sort of abuse, any commission of a felony, drug-related injuries, childbirth. We want to know when new people come into the world. We want to know when old people go out of the world. Okay. Same thing with even if it's childbirth and the patient, the baby doesn't live, we still need to report that. Any type of suicides, dog bites, communicable diseases, assaults, domestic violence. You guys know this stuff, right? Everybody got their picture? Sexual assaults, rapes, infectious disease, anytime we transport somebody in restraints, crime scene stuff, and anytime somebody leaves the world. Everybody got those? Awesome. All right, so it is 9 o'clock. We've got a little bit more to go through. So next session is lifting and moving. The lecture isn't nearly as long, so we'll finish this up. The lecture for lifting and moving is pretty quick. Good part is you're finally going to have a day where you don't listen to me drone on. You're going to have to get hands-on and actually do stuff. Of course, we got to put some information in your head before we can do that. So if you would, for next session, wear comfortable clothes, preferably clothes that you're okay with getting a little dusty, dirty. I'm not talking filthy, but just don't show up in a tux. Remember, when you go home tonight, or at least some point before you come in, I need a witness statement from the video that we watched before, okay? Actually, anybody that wants to go through an SCBA policy, bring one to the department. If you guys want to hang around for a few minutes, we can do that. If not, we can work it into the next session. Is that okay with you? Okay. So if you guys want to stay, we'll do it. If not, we'll do it next session.